To catch a Hardy, they've got to get up very early in the morning.
What time?
Oh, about 1:30. What time?
Hello, just when you thought it was safe, here we are again for another episode of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of the Laurel and Hardy blog, and I'll be your host for today's bumper show. This is episode 18, and on today's show we'll be looking at the next film in the Laurel and Hardy chronology, Their Purple Moment. And I'm thrilled to say that joining me to discuss this classic comedy and much, much more besides is a very, very special guest, Laurel and Hardy and Hal Roach Studios expert, Richard W. Bann. Before we get started, I just wanted to say hello to Brian Dunphy, one of our loyal listeners who tunes in each month from Cleveland, Ohio. Brian took the time to write me an email last month, and I wanted to share his comments here. Brian says, Patrick, I've just listened to episode number 17, You're Done Tootin', and I wanted to thank you personally for the wonderful job you're doing with the blogcast. I have an hour drive to work each day, and I listen to various podcasts and audiobooks on my drive. But I particularly look forward to a new Laurel and Hardy blogcast each month, and I'm sure I've listened to each episode more than once now. The show is beautifully produced, and the sound bites are perfectly placed laugh-out-loud moments. Your excellent recaps of these films, followed by masterful and friendly interviews, are perfect. Keep up the good work. Cheers, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for those comments. It's always a joy to receive feedback like that. Now, if you'd like to get in touch, like Brian did, you can email me at laurelandhardyblog@gmail.com. That's Laurel and A-N-D Hardy blog @gmail.com, or via the contact page on www.blog-heads.com. blogheads.com. And don't forget, if you haven't already, you can join the Blogheads community on our Facebook group. So just search Blog-Heads on Facebook and you should find us. The group's a great place to find more information relating to these podcasts, my blogs, news of new merchandise being released, and especially a place to communicate with fellow fans and many of the special guests that we've welcomed to the blogcast as well, including today's special guest, Richard Bann. So Richard will be joining us in just a few minutes, so stay tuned. And so we'll begin today's show with the audio blog of today's film in focus, which is Their Purple Moment. It was a two-reeler filmed 15th of February to the 24th of February 1928. It was released on the 19th of May the same year. It was produced by Hal Roach, directed by James Parrott, and photographed by George Stevens. The main cast: Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, Anita Garvin, Kay DeLees, Faye Holderness, Lily Teo, Tiny Sanford, and Leo Willis. With Mr. and Mrs. Hal Roach freshly departed on their marriage-saving around-the-world tour, the Culver City studio was now dependent on Warren Doan, general manager and vice president, to steer the ship. Doan set to his task with determination. At the end of January 1927, Doan gave a luncheon at the studio to which he invited journalists from all the prominent trade papers. He aimed to rally their support to tackle a long-running problem that threatened the longevity of the Hal Roach Studios and those of his competitors such as Mack Sennett and Al Christie. The problem was a low status, or succinctly, a lack of importance given to short features by theatre owners and exhibitors. Hal Roach himself would become a vocal champion, an ambassador of sorts for short features in the following years. He would campaign tirelessly for their equality with feature-length productions. This was especially notable in the early 30s, as the double feature programme ominously threatened to displace 1-, 2- and 3-reelers altogether. Yet it was Warren Doan, in Roach's absence, that publicly took up the baton and sounded this early call to action. One of the trade papers in attendance at the luncheon was the Exhibitors Herald and Moving Picture World. In their issue, dated 4th of February 1928, they recorded and printed Doan's remarks to the assembled media. Quote, "In his speech, Doan said, 'It has by now been thoroughly demonstrated that no operator of theatres can be influenced by the general argument that he ought to have a two-reel comedy in his show. That argument has been used by the comedy producers, by the trade papers editorially, and by the distributors with practically negligible results. And in my opinion, properly so, because as an argument, it is no argument. We must realise that the theatre is being operated for the same reason that any other business is operated, which is to make money for its owner rather than to make money for the producers of the two-reel comedies. I am firmly of the opinion that a motion picture, no matter how short nor how long, which cannot convince exhibitors that it has the ability to bring people to the box office, has no place in the first-run theatre, and its importance in subsequent runs must be very slight indeed. Therefore, in my opinion, the solution of the problem is for comedy producers to furnish the industry with product that has box office drawing power. Through a number of circumstances, the attention of the industry has been directed to subjects of feature length, and very little attention has been given to short subjects, so that in the recent past, the majority of short subjects produced have merited no greater prominence than they have received. The very fact that Doan made the above public statement, which would undoubtedly have been constructed in collaboration with Hal Roach, shows, if nothing else, the absolute confidence they had in the ability and their quality of their studio's product. One could also argue that this may partly have been an attempt to squeeze their competitors, whose shorts were perhaps of lesser quality, out of the market altogether, thus giving the Roach Studios a larger monopoly. 11 days after the article containing Doan's speech was printed, the studio's Golden Boys were back on set, attempting to maintain the consistency of the quality of their output in their latest picture, Their Purple Moment. At the studio, Stan and Babe could seemingly do no wrong. Their popularity increased with every picture, and Roach finally decided to throw everything he could behind the Laurel and Hardy team. To that end, he allocated one of his best directors, James Parrott, to assume the directorial responsibility for the boys' latest picture. Parrott joined the Roach Studio as a gag writer and extra back in 1917, then after a few years became a sizable lead comic in his own right under the name Paul Parrott. As his comedies failed to hit the heights, he was eventually replaced by another comedian, his younger brother, Charles, who gave himself the screen name Charlie Chase. Under James Parrott's direction, the Charlie Chase output became one of the studio's most successful series. However, by late 1927 and into 1928, it had become apparent that the Laurel and Hardy comedies were fast becoming the studio's premier product. James Parrott became Stan and Babe's principal director from here on. He was a significant contributor to some of Laurel and Hardy's best and most loved comedies, with around 20 directorial credits to his name. Parrott was a popular and loyal member of the Roach staff and was friends with Stan and Babe away from the studio, often socialising with them individually. His friendship with Stan would likely have been a significant factor in their success working together on the lot. As has been well documented, Stan's influence on the construction and production of the Laurel and Hardy pictures was considerable, and it grew along with the team's reputation itself. Any director assigned to the Laurel Hardy unit had to accept that Stan would be there as an additional uncredited director as well as one of the star performers. In John McCabe's seminal work on the boys, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy, McCabe quotes another Roach director and close friend of Stan's, Charlie Rogers. Quote, "Stan was the spirit behind the directors, but whenever Stan suggested something in conference or during shooting, it almost always proved to be the right thing. He watched closely over the pictures, but it was like kind of a beneficent father, not a bossy one who always wanted his own way at any cost. You see, by nature he is a polite man and a gentle fellow, and those qualities always came over. He was the director's conscience." Their Purple Moment marks a significant moment in the development of the Laurel and Hardy team. It was the first of what would soon become a staple genre for the boys to exploit again and again, the age-old contest of husbands versus wives. Forget Walter Long, Noah Young, Tiny Sanford, Charlie Hall, even Jimmy Finlayson. Laurel and Hardy's most significant and certainly most intimidating nemesis had to be their on-screen wives. Of course, there have been female co-stars playing opposite them in earlier films. However, Their Purple Moment was the first Laurel and Hardy comedy where we find our heroes pitted against the overbearing and conniving spouse. Stan and the gag writers found this reservoir rich with comedy potential. It would be well tapped over the coming years of their screen partnership, providing some of their most memorable and hilarious moments. Even though stories around domestic entanglements were standard fare for the writers and gag men toiling on the Roach lot, and indeed throughout Hollywood in the late 20s, there is perhaps little wonder that this theme eventually found its way into Stan and Babe's work. Babe's struggles with his wife Myrtle's alcoholism continued, causing the Hardys much distress and heartache. In addition, according to Stan's biographer Fred Lawrence Giles, at some point during this year, 1928, Stan began a 10-year affair with actress Alice Ardell, signifying that all was not rosy in the Laurel household. Clarifying this affair is almost impossible, as the relationship never appears to have been sensationally or even respectfully reported by the press. In fact, Giles seems to be the only biographer to have recorded this life event, his primary source of information being another of Stan's ex-wives, Virginia Ruth Laurel. According to Giles, this would be the first of such affairs that Stan had behind Lois's back over the following few years. However, one should be cautious of taking such claims at face value, especially given that the primary source was an estranged ex-wife of Stan's, and also the lack of clarity in corroborating evidence. What is certain is that Stan's marriage to Lois wasn't to last. Life with Stan, with a new baby to care for in the mix, can't have been easy for Lois. It wasn't just the long hours he spent at the studio, creating gags and writing scripts, filming the scenes, and then continuing in the editing room when the day's shoot was over. After all that, Stan would then bring colleagues home with him to talk through story ideas over drinks and cigarettes. So if Stan's experience of what having a wife was like is reflected at all in the way he represented them on screen, one can't help but think he may only have had himself to blame. In the opening scene of their purple moment, we find Stan standing on his doorstep, getting a story straight in his head before entering his house and joining his battle axe of a wife, played by Faye Holderness, who was waiting for him and his pay packet. Stan's wife, named on the title card as Mrs. Pincher, clearly lives by the code, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. However, we soon learn that somehow Stan has been holding back a few dollars each time and stashing his money in a secret location right under his wife's nose. Unbeknownst to Stan, his suspicious wife has spotted the stash and retrieves the money, replacing the cash for cigar coupons. Next, Ollie and his equally hardline wife come calling at Stan's residence. Ollie's miserable, downtrodden appearance, his facial expressions, and body language wonderfully convey his misery. The comedy here is all in the boys' little gestures. Their physical discomfort, especially Ollie's, is just a joy to watch, and he perfectly demonstrates what a brilliant actor Oliver Hardy actually is. Like a naughty child, his attempts to share his tales of woe with his buddy without his wife witnessing are sublime. As the story pans out, the boys grab Stan's secret wallet full of the phony cash and persuade their wives to let them go off for an evening at the bowling alley. Of course, their actual plans are more centred around having a night on the town, courtesy of Stan's savings. While strutting through town, the boys pass a nightclub called the Pink Pup, just as two guys are violently chased out of the venue for being unable to pay their bill. The Pink Pup, built on the Roach Studios backlot, also appears in earlier shorts such as Love 'Em and Weep and Putting Pants on Philip, and would turn up again, for instance, in That's My Wife. The fleeing customers have left behind their two girlfriends, played by Kay DeLise and Anita Garvin, who are asked by the maitre d', played by Tiny Sanford, to pay the bill, but clearly they have no money either. Ollie gallantly offers to assume all responsibility for the ladies, and so the new foursome enters the Pink Pup for a slap-up meal and a jolly good time. On top of the ladies' existing bill, the group proceed to run up an even greater one. This enlarged bill includes big steak dinners for all four of them, and even one for the girls' cab driver, Leah Willis, who has burst in demanding to be paid. Stan even treats a group of performing dwarves to candy. It's at this point that Stan discovers the wad of cash in his wallet is nothing more than the cigar coupons. He nervously asks for the cost of the candy to be added to the bill, and he looks again into his wallet. Then follows the first example in a Laurel and Hardy film of the prolonged close-up of Stan struggling to comprehend what's right in front of him. He varies between a mixture of despair, confusion, a refusal to believe his eyes, rechecking his wallet, and then back to despair, and the cycle begins again. This is such a brilliant and unique gag, and one could argue that no comedian other than Stan Laurel would dare or even be able to pull this off. It was so effective and so unusually noteworthy that on the film's release, Motion Picture News, 26th of May 1928, afforded it special mention as part of their review. Quote, "Laurel is a dandy comedian. In this comedy, he fares better than Hardy. Laurel is subjected to a long close-up, showing his bewilderment and consternation when he finds out what is in his wallet." Eventually, Stan discreetly gets the message of their desperate situation to his friend, and Ollie's reactions are just as wonderfully painful to watch. Once again, the comedy is all about reactions and facial expressions, as we visibly see the reality of the situation sinking in for both of them. Some hilarious moments follow as the boys try several times to sneak out by sliding off their seats using the darkened room and the floor show as cover. Inevitably, the boys' wives turn up at the club, having been tipped off by the neighbourhood busybody who happened to witness the boys entering the venue with a couple of strange women on their arms. After much running and crawling, trying not to be seen, the two desperate husbands find themselves in the kitchens, quickly joined by Tiny Sanford and then a couple of furious wives. The finale, whilst mildly amusing, is somewhat disappointing. Ollie pins the blame on Stan, who throws a fruit pie at Ollie, only to succeed in hitting Ollie's wife full in the face. Matters quickly descend into a food fight, a sort of poor man's version of the pie fight climax to the Battle of the Century, and then the film fades out with Ollie's pie-covered face looking exasperatedly into the camera. So this finale is disappointing even for a two-reel, as it leaves many unanswered questions. For example, one is left wondering what happened to the girlfriends, how the unpaid bill and taxi fare get settled, what kind of retribution is doled out by the wives, to name but a few. However, over the years, research by leading experts such as Richard W. Bann and Randy Skretvet has at least provided solid reasons for why the picture ends in this manner. Initially, a different ending was scripted and even filmed. Yet following previews, the production team deemed the audience response unsatisfactory, and they returned to the studio and shot a completely new ending. After the wives arrive at the club in the original ending, Stan and Ollie are concealed backstage in the dwarves' dressing room. These little people aid the boys even further by trying to help them escape. The boys don frilly dresses, complete with hats and parasols, and walking on their knees, they join the dwarves' dancing act and perform alongside them as part of the floor show. During the performance, though, they're spotted in turn by the girlfriends, the taxi driver, the waiter, and the wives. Still in costume, the boys flee the club whilst the wives settle the outstanding bills. However, as soon as Stan and Ollie get outside, they are stopped by a passing street cop played by Edgar Kennedy. They quickly evade Kennedy's clutches and run off down the street, presumably still on their knees, until the pursuing wives eventually catch them. The boys laugh at their situation as they begin to get frog-marched home, but at the last, the wives fall into a vast, deep, curbside, mud-filled hole. Now, on paper, this original ending makes more sense and successfully brings the escalating storyline to a much more satisfactory conclusion. Production stills do exist of some of these cutscenes, which at least gives us some idea of what the intended ending looked like, if nothing else. In 1981, Richard W. Bann asked Hal Roach why he'd chosen to replace this original ending. The boss's response was brilliantly no-nonsense and businesslike. Quote, "By bringing this up," Roach challenged, "you suggest we made a mistake changing the wind-up. I say you are projecting your hopes into what you read in the script, just as we did. A lot of the time what's written does not play. The routine with the midgets escaping as midgets did not pay off at the screening room. Otherwise we would have kept it. The business with the pies may not have been great, but that always worked with audiences. We didn't have time for anything better. Run your print with an audience, then come back and tell me if we did the right thing changing it." Context is an essential factor to keep in mind when attempting to analyse old movies. For the modern-day consumer, so used to watching films to death and studying the extended cut of this and the director's cut of that, it's easy to lose sight of the original intended purpose for the pictures made during this golden age of Hollywood. The film had to serve the theatre audience's needs following its release, and very little else. The studios produced movies as a disposable commodity, not made for countless viewings and microscopic inspection. As Mr. Roach points out, the original scripted ending, whilst arguably appearing more satisfactory to our modern tastes, wasn't appreciated by the 1928 audiences that previewed it. Rather than a complicated plot-based ending, what the public actually wanted, or maybe even demanded, was a chase ending, as John McCabe expertly describes. Quote, "It is perhaps easy to think of the chase sequence as the easy way out of an ending a film. In the case of the one or two reeler, however, in most instances, it was mandatory. Mack Sennett and Larry Semon were the great exponents of the chase, but there is hardly a film of the golden days of comedy that does not use the spirit of the chase in some form or other in its final footage. In these early days of their character development, Laurel and Hardy used the chase frequently. It was then what it is now, a wrap-up, a gathering of climaxes." The response to their purple moment suggests that the Roach Studios made the right call, as the overall reception was generally very positive. Several reviewers correctly identified that the picture was not as good as the boys' previous outings, but nevertheless, exhibitors and critics widely acknowledged the film as another quality short from the best comedy team in the business. Illustrating this, the following contemporary reviews taken from various publications come straight from the horses' mouths. Their Purple Moments, a comedy full of laughs that will chase away all your blues, roars and more laughs, from the La Trobe Bulletin, 4th of August, 1928. Then from the Central Theatre, Selkirk, Manitoba, in an Exhibitors Herald, A Moving Picture World, 2nd of November 28. The first weak one I've had from this pair. It's pretty slow until the last 400 feet. Then from the Majestic Theatre, Myerstown, Laurel Hardy comedies are the best on the market. They are very popular in this town and are beginning to show box office value. Although their Purple Moment is not one of their best, it gave a very good satisfaction and had the house in uproars. From the York Daily Record, 13th of November 28, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy come to the front again with another laugh-provoking picture, Purple Moments, and of course, they are a scream as usual. And finally, returning to Raymond Ganley, writing in the notable trade paper Motion Picture News on the 26th of May 1928, he possibly summed it up best, reviewing it like this. Quote, "What appears to be the best comedy team in present-day short subjects, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy, appear in this new Hal Roach comedy, invested with an amazing amount of laughter and replete with really funny happenings. Is it as good as the finishing touch and that other laughable affair in which they were washing machine salesmen? No, not quite as good. But even when this pair is offered an average assortment of gags, they give vent to humour far above the ordinary comics." And so now we come to the moment you've all been waiting for. It's today's special guest interview with Richard W. Bann. Our guest joining us on the blogcast today is a man whose name is inextricably linked to the legacy of not only Laurel and Hardy, but wider to the Hal Roach Studios itself. I'm talking, of course, about Richard W. Bann. Richard is a film historian, and as well as writing numerous online essays, he has co-authored celebrated books on cinema, such as The Little Rascals, The Life and Times of Our Gang, with Leonard Maltin, and what has been known for decades as the Laurel and Hardy Bible, the simply titled Laurel and Hardy with John McCabe and Al Kilgore. He is consultant to the copyright proprietor of the Hal Roach Library in the Eastern Hemisphere and was instrumental in arranging for the Hal Roach Nitrate collection to be deposited at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. In short, Richard is usually to be found at the heart of any projects aiming to restore and preserve not only the films of the Hal Roach Studios, but their history, reputation, and their legacy as well. So it is with immense pleasure that I say, Richard Bann, welcome to the Laurel and Hardy blogcast.
Thank you, Patrick. Very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to do this because I've heard a few of your podcasts, and I can see that you are serious about these films, and I appreciate that.
Well, and I appreciate that. That is something coming from you. I really appreciate that, Richard. Thank you so much for that. But yes, I am very serious about the films, comedies as they are. And I know Hal Roach himself was very serious about his comedies being taken seriously. So we should give them the respect that is due. So that's what I'm trying to do in my small way. So it's wonderful that you've come to join us today. A very short introduction for someone who's been so involved in the world of Laurel and Hardy for so long. So hopefully we'll pick up on a lot of the things that I missed from the introduction as we go along, Richard. To start with, what I like to do to ask all guests is if you could just tell us a little bit about how you discovered the work of the Hal Roach Studios in the first place, in particular Laurel and Hardy, of course. What are your earliest memories of them, and how did you discover them?
Well, like Muriel Evans, June Marlowe, and Leroy Shield, I am from the state of Minnesota in the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. This was the third largest TV market in the country. The film director at WCCO TV there, who later became a good friend of mine, was a nice man named Harry Jones. And I am forever indebted to him because he secured broadcast TV licenses from separate distributors for both the Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy packages. And that's how they entered our home and really changed my life. So I was introduced to both series as well as all the B-Westerns then flooding the TV airwaves at an impressionable and vulnerable age. So they became really part of my DNA, and I love them instantly. I still do, and really, I just never grew up. Now today though, I'm so old. I'm so old that I can remember when it was a novelty to have a TV set anywhere in the neighborhood. And I can still see the guy delivering the first one we had, walking up the sidewalk outside, carrying the thing. So camped in front of that TV set was a little kid. And that's how I was introduced to both of these classic Hal Roach Studios properties. But I don't remember what I first saw or what I thought or anything else except for one thing. Late afternoon, I was watching the Our Gang comedies on TV, and my father came home from work. My mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and there was a commercial break, and I ran into the kitchen and I asked them, after dinner, can you drive me to where those kids are? Because I'd like to meet them. Of course, they laughed at their idiot son and said, don't you know you're watching old movies there? Those kids are all grown up now. They're our age. So that's the key thing I remember. But by the time I was in grad school, I'd become friends with this fellow I mentioned, Harry Jones at WCCO TV. And I was able to gear the format and presentation and promotion of the Laurel and Hardy films from being a kid show to being aimed at an adult audience in primetime access programming slots. And in this way, Laurel and Hardy got the respect they deserved. And when they started pulling respectable ratings, because they did, other stations around the country copied what we were doing. So that was rewarding. And as a side note, maybe I should offer, I do want to offer a disclaimer here at the outset. I am recovering from vertigo right now, so my focus is a little more off than usual. So vertigo, love the film, hate the spinning. Now, I haven't had a chance to rescreen Their Purple Moment, in part because in searching, I can't find it here. And I was looking forward to it because long ago, I replaced my Blackhawk 16 with a print down struck right from the nitrate after we restored and preserved this film for Munich in the 90s. And we had the original, then still pristine 35 millimeter nitrate export camera negative with flash titles shot by Jack Roach, who was standing right alongside the official cinematographer, George Stevens, shooting the domestic neg, because they had a domestic neg and an export neg. So anyway, though it's far from my favorite Laurel and Hardy, that print does look amazing. Therefore, I haven't rescreened the picture, but I did reread the essay I wrote for Munich's official Laurel and Hardy website about 20 years ago, and I did pull out the stills, and I think I have them all here, and I want to say something about that later. So while I'm not as well prepared or as focused as I should be because of the vertigo, I do recall, and I can tell you which one was Laurel and which one was Hardy.
That's a start.
Not everyone can say that these days, and I found that out, and I have an example I could share because I think this might be of interest. Sort of a metaphor or hyperbole. I tell friends about my frustrations a decade ago when I was co-producing the Vivendi box set of Laurel and Hardy DVDs, the Essential Collection, that is. That's what we called it. Last year, we issued the definitive restorations on Blu-ray, which I worked on, but I was not an official co-producer, I guess, or maybe I was. I have to ask Kit Parker. But this was the Essential set on DVD I'm talking about from a decade ago. And, you know, this is the one with the extra where I should have corrected Jerry Lewis during the interview or fixed it in editing, but I failed to because, unlike Rob Stone and Leonard Maltin, I am not particularly a fan of Jerry Lewis. So I let it go, all the nonsense he was saying, which is a mistake I have to own now. So you can blame me for that. And of course, blame Jerry Lewis because he's the one who said those things.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Anyway, from Vivendi Entertainment, it was the Essential DVDs. One afternoon, we were having a production meeting over in the Universal Tower, the famous Black Tower in Universal City, with attorneys, technical people, They were mostly women of the Blanche Payson variety, all sitting around this big conference room table. Very important, don't you know, all these phony baloney business meetings we were having. These folks, they were not film people. They'd mostly migrated over from the not so aptly named Genius Products, if you've heard of them. And those are the folks which gave the world the Little Rascals DVD box set that Leonard Maltin and I were going to fix for them, but we couldn't and we didn't. We tried. So I knew we weren't going to share a mutuality of interest on this project, because these folks knew nothing about Hal Roach Studios, and they cared less. This was just another product, like some kind of a widget in a factory to bring into the marketplace, you know. So I had to fight for the integrity of the release, as I was the only one representing the interest of serious film people, serious fans like you who knew and cared about the films. And at one point in this particular meeting, I lost it. I lost it. I was so frustrated trying to persuade people to see things the way fans do. And there was some issue where I concluded, okay, this is important. This is the hill I'm going to choose to die on if I have to. So I was boiling over because these dopes failed to appreciate the importance of something I was fighting for, whatever it was. Maybe it was finding room in the set for the domestic release of Pardon Us, and I didn't get my way. Maybe that was it, something like. So now this is a metaphor or a hyperbole for what they really said, but it was like this. This is what I was dealing with trying to produce the Vivendi DVD box set. It's like the scene in Saps at Sea where Harry Hayden says to Hardy, there, my boy, calm yourself. We understand. We get it. Calm yourself now. So to sum up here, you're telling us now Stan is the skinny one. He's the skinny one. We get that, right? And Laurel is the fat one. Okay, we get that. We're with you. Okay, calm down. But in some of the films they talk, and others they don't. Why is that?
Unbelievable.
So actually, in some sense, I'm pretty sure it was a little like that, making their purple moment or any film. I think everyone has their own vision of how things should go, making a movie. But these agendas can clash with those of others requiring compromise. And not everyone gets his way. If you work on a film, you learn that most actors are only concerned with their own part. That's all they worry about. You've got the cinematographer. All he worries about is what he's going to get into that box. You've got a props guy. All he worries about is where is all the stuff he needs when he needs it for any given scene, all the way down the line. The producer and the director, though, they have to worry about everything. So naturally, eventually, you have conflicts and compromise, and no one gets his own way 100% of the time, and not even Hal Roach, because he had to answer to his bank loan, his exhibitors, and during the Lowe's MGM period, like for when they made their Purple Moment, he had to answer to Nick Schenck in New York, who was the most powerful man in the movie industry. So anyway, I'm dealing with vertigo here, possibly developing into what could be a severe case of hornophobia, which I'm sure you know about. So
yes. Horns to the right of me! Horns to the left of me! Horns all over me! Stop it! Horns! 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 There. Oh, no, come. Calm yourself, young man. Calm yourself. There, your nerves are all jangled. I'd advise you to go home immediately and call your doctor.
That's just exactly what I'll do.
Yes.
Come, Stanley.
So on to your second question, which I've already been previewing.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to find out a little bit about your sort of a career path. So you've discovered Hal Roach and Laurel and Hardy at an early age. Where did that take you? How did you sort of become involved in the world of classic film?
Okay, so growing up, I'm watching these films on TV and enjoying them, but nothing obsessive. 1957, Hardy dies. I can recall sitting at a dinner table and cutting the obituary out of the paper. Now, today I live on the east side of Beverly Thrills, but at the time I was a little kid living in St. Paul, the middle of the country. The possibility of getting to LA and connecting with any of these people seemed as remote as parasailing over the moon or something like that, you know? So along comes 1963. I discovered Jack McCabe's seminal biography, been out for a couple of years, but I didn't discover it until 1963, Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy. Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes, and I vividly recall the wonderful experience of reading that book by one of them.
Oh, lovely.
And not long after, I struck up a correspondence with Jack McCabe, a great friend and mentor whom I was close to until he passed. Jack shared a secret at the end of his life given to him by Stan Laurel before Jack died. He passed this secret on to only two people, just Dwayne Smith of the New York Suns, now deceased, and me. So 1965, 2 years later, Stan Laurel dies. And this was a watershed event because Hardy was dead and now Laurel was gone. So this foreclosed on any opportunity to ever meet Stan Laurel or Oliver Hardy. And I thought about this all year long. And 1966, still in St. Paul, the local film critic, who was also a top 40 disc jockey who booked bands and emceed events like when the Beatles came to town, and he was the host for the Beatles. His name was Bill Deal, and he formed Oasis number 3 after the Sons of the Desert and the Dancing Cuckoos. The third Sons of the Desert tent was Oasis number 3, and the Sons of the Desert christened the Blockheads tent. And I talked to Bill Deal. I went to see him. I wanted to join, but I couldn't. Why? I was underage, and it would have jeopardized the tents, the venues where they met their liquor license. So nevertheless, Bill and I became friends, and a few years later, as soon as I reached 21, for some reason, he turned the third Sons tent, Blockheads, over to me, as I guess because he was so busy with 4 careers. Now, because Bill was a popular media personality with the ability to promote Laurel and Hardy, at that time, Blockheads became the largest Sons tent there's ever been. And I inherited a mailing list of 400 people, including many professional people, including the chairman of publicly traded corporations like 3M. And I remember his name. It was Harry Heltzer. That was a big deal. So that same year, I began collecting first 8mm and then 16mm films. I had become interested in studying all the different production units throughout the history of Hal Roach Studios, not just Laurel and Hardy and our gang. And I wanted to get at who was responsible for the comedy culture at this place? Who created and sustained it? Why was Hal Roach Studios so special? Why did so many people want to work there and never leave? Who was the comedy auteur, the one who invested so many of these great films with that unmistakable charm and style that you see? You watch so many of these films, and the love shows, the care shows. So who created the comedy culture responsible for that? And there's a great story arising out of the film Wrong Again that goes a long way to explaining the answer, but I won't go into that here. So anyhow, I had learned that Hal Roach himself was still alive, age 74, and I reasoned that he had to be, really, I thought, the single most interesting man in the history of creation. That's, honest to God, that's what I thought. So I got his phone number. He was in the book, and I called him, and then I began sending him things with questions to comment on. And he answered me, and he took my calls. So then, 1967, Bill Everson's the Films of Laurel and Hardy was published.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've read that book.
Oh, yes, many times.
I devoured that book. Now, later, I lived in New York for 10 years where Bill was, having moved there from England. So he's your countryman, Patrick. And he became a great friend and mentor. When he knew he was dying, he had some key 16 millimeter B Western sent to me that he felt I would want. But when I first read his book, I had become obsessive about Laurel and Hardy. And I found out that in a rush to meet a deadline, he'd made literally hundreds of errors in that text. Yeah. But me being bored in school with nothing better to do, I guess, I chronicled all these errors I thought he should have been more careful about.
Oh, you didn't send them to him, did you?
Yes, I did. No, I couldn't. What I did is I annotated the book. I still have this book, and all the margins are filled with these errors. Now, looking back on my own arrogance, who was I to criticize William K. Everson? Yeah. The smart-ass kid. So I can only summon Mr. Laurel's line in Blockheads. You remember how dumb I used to be?
That's it. Did you send it into Pratfall magazine? I'm sure I've read comments.
I can't remember if I don't know if I did or not.
I'm sure there was a big discussion in Pratfall magazine. Well, I say a big discussion. There was an in and out of correspondence, and I'm sure I may be wrong. I'll have to look it up, but I'm sure it might have been commented from you.
That was so long ago. Honestly, I don't remember, but it could be because that's what I did that, and I was this know-it-all kid film buff who was so annoyed that William K. Everson evidently didn't care enough about Laurel and Hardy to get the facts right. So. At this point, mea culpa, as having more wisdom than I ever did. I mean, I wrote a letter to Bill, and he sent me a considerate letter in response at the time. But he was one of the absolute greats, and everyone who was lucky enough to know him well will tell you that. So Bill Everson, Jack McCabe, Bill Deal, big influences, great friends. I was a disciple of each man, and I truly miss them all.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So at this point, Leonard Maltin and I were already corresponding. Teenage kids. I was in New York, actually staying at Leonard's house in Teaneck. We went into the city, and Leonard introduced me to Bill Everson. The first time I met Bill in person, and then I would see them both at film conventions we would travel to, and also to the annual Sons banquets in New York. Whereas I told you off air, Bob and Ray were regular guests, and believe me, you will thank me the longest day you live when you start listening to Bob and Ray. I promise you can bet the ranch on that, really. So those early Sons banquets was where you could really get to know key Sons founding members who became close personal friends of mine, like Jack McCabe, Al Kilgore, Chuck McCann. And you would see Ida Laurel there, villains and reprobates like Richard Feiner and Larry Harmon, and of course, I mean, that's where I first met them. And of course, Hal Roach Studios alumni like Ben Shipman, Felix Knight, Rosina Lawrence, especially Patsy Kelly, and Herb Gelbspan, who was then still employed operating the studio's New York office. So this was the period where I started phoning and corresponding with every single Hal Roach Studios grad I could find, eventually more than 100. So 1968, right before Bill Deal installed me as Grand Sheik of Blockheads, some friends and I at the University of Minnesota had formed a Chumpet Oxford tent. And we were then building little collections of first 8 millimeter and then 16 millimeter prints of Hal Roach comedies, mostly purchased from the Easton Phelan Corporation, doing business as Blackhawk Films of Davenport, Iowa, Iowa being a neighboring state of Minnesota. And 3 of us decided to organize a pilgrimage there. And I had been corresponding with the founder, Kent D. Easton, my future boss at Blackhawk Films, and he welcomed us and conducted a tour of this amazing, unique business, which is another story we probably don't have time for. So meanwhile, whenever I had some money, I was flying to LA to see Hal Roach, meet studio alumni, visit filming locations. That's a big deal for me. Bob Satterfield and I were the ones who first found the music box steps.
Right.
You may have read, you mentioned pratfall before, Billy Gilbert. I think there was a story. Billy Gilbert led people from the way out west tent to the wrong steps, but
Bless him.
just like the Laurel and Hardy comedy. Here they are. Oh, that's nothing.
Oh, brilliant.
So by the second time I came out here, Hal Roach invited me to stay at his house in Bel Air. So I was getting really lucky making all these connections. And I told Leonard Maltin at the time, I thought we should do a book on our gang, which was the only important film series that no one else had yet covered. And only because the research was going to be so difficult, dealing with all of those 221 films and all the talent responsible for them on both sides of the camera. Where are they? What could they tell us, etc.? No one else was going to take on a task like that. You still can't find good quality prints of the silent films. So we had to cover them all. So that book took 5 years. 5 years, but it must have been worth it because a lot of people tell us, and I know this is a little self-serving and embarrassing to say, please forgive me, but people do tell us it's their favorite and the best of all the film history books they have. I keep hearing that, so there must be some scintilla of truth in it.
Absolutely.
Now, at the same time, Leonard and I collaborated on a little Laurel and Hardy book, and then Jack McCabe, Al Kilgore, and I collaborated on a big Laurel and Hardy book, which, as you say, came to be called the Bible. And I can tell you about more of those. I can tell you more about those projects, the Jennison, if you want, if there's time or some time. But this was the period when I was identifying all the talent who entered the frames of any Hal Roach comedy. Again, I was being obsessive about this. I love these films so much. I wanted to connect with the talent on both sides of the camera who had created them and thank these people. But who were they? So sure, the fans in the Sons, you go to a Sons meeting, everybody knew who Charlie Hall, Jimmy Finlayson, Edgar Kennedy, Billy Gilbert, Mae Bush, everybody knew who they were. But who were the scores of others? I thought the least we could do was identify them, record their names someplace like in a book, and then try to find them or their families and tell them how much what they did means to us.
Yeah, that's lovely.
So at this point, everyone takes these names for granted, as though everyone today always knew who these people were. But back then, when I was doing this work, no one seemed to care about this. I'd identify people like Sam Lufkin and Jack Hill. Look at how many films they're in, yet no one noticed, no one cared. I'd tell people, they'd stare at me like, what are you doing? They're serving cocktails here. Why don't you have one? So I wasn't getting, so I talked to Dave Lord Heath about this, your country, Patrick, from the great website he's built, that as I'd make these discoveries and tell friends, it meant nothing to them. But I'm grateful to Dave Lord Heath because he recognizes that I did this before all these many, and there are too many, books have been written before the internet, before cell phones, before Blu-rays, DVD, VHS, laser discs, before cable TV, before everything. To even see the films back then, you had to hope some TV station would program them, or you had to buy expensive 16 millimeter prints from Black Hawk Films. Your only research resources were traveling to the Academy Library in LA and the Lincoln Center Library in New York. Now, who could do that? And so what I did is I bought casting directories to use from places like the Larry Edmunds bookshop here in Hollywood. I bought still photos to send or show, or I made frame enlargements from the film off TV, and I'd send these out to surviving Hal Roach Studios alumni that I could find and connect with, asking, who is this? Who are these people? What can you tell me about them? So while I was doing this, I earned a master's degree in accounting and management sciences from the University of Minnesota, and I was employed in the commercial audit division of a Big 8 public accounting firm, Arthur Anderson and Company. And my father was pushing me to be a tax accountant. So I had just taken the law school exam when my life was saved because I received a job offer to join Blackhawk Films as a vice president.
Wow.
So it turned out to have been the next best thing to working at the original Hal Roach Studios in Culver City. And I think this was 1973. And really, I've never worked since. You can't call what I've for the rest of my life.
I know what you mean. Yeah, absolutely.
It's all fun. But because that began a lifelong process, what I've done, it's a lifelong process of exploring and finding and screening and handling, merchandising, writing about, restoring, preserving, promoting, and even saving and sharing the films created at Hal Roach Studios with other people who love them too, like you, Patrick.
Yeah.
So that Blackhawk chapter of my life lasted but a few years, however, because the two owners, Kent Easton and Martin Phelan, were getting old, and they sold the company to a newspaper conglomerate, which slowly ruined the company. And when I was there, Blackhawk Films employed 125 people, but there were only 4 of us, including Mr. Easton, who were film people, and we were all pushed out the door in pretty short order. And then the company died a miserable death, which was sad. So then I went to New York and I did film library consulting for Hal Roach Studios with Herb Gelbspan, and also several of their licensees, including, you may or may not know about these companies, Overseas Programming, Prime TV, Richard Feiner and Company, King World Productions, International Television Trading Corporations. They all played important roles in the history of these films, and maybe I can cover that some other time. But inevitably, interacting with these Hal Roach Studios licensees led me to the successor in interest to Hal Roach Studios throughout the Eastern Hemisphere, where you live, Patrick. That became my main career.
Right.
The copyrights, the corporation, Hal Roach Studios, all its assets, they had been divided in half as between the Eastern and Western hemispheres in 1971 when Hal Roach himself sold his stake in the studio after it had emerged from bankruptcy in 1967. Went bankrupt in 59, got out of bankruptcy in 67. Hal Roach moved to New York. He tried licensing the library and tried to engage in new production, but the pushback, he was tired of it. In 1971, he sold out. So then for approximately 30 years, I was the film library consultant to this constellation of companies employing, now these are facts, this is hard to comprehend. This constellation of companies employed 11,000 people. We were the largest producer and distributor of motion pictures and television programming in the world outside the United States, headquartered in Munich, Germany. And as a rights trading entity, we owned or controlled most of the major USA film libraries for certainly the German-speaking territories and often many, if not most, of the countries throughout the Eastern Hemisphere. And because I had this special connection to the Hal Roach Library, and they had acquired all right, title, and interest throughout the Eastern Hemisphere, that's how I got into this company. So anyway, this company, the big German company, was founded and privately held by 2 men who met one another as teenagers in an Allied prisoner of war camp at the end of World War II. And they were Dr. Leo Kirsch and Dr. Hans Andresen. One was the face of the company. The other, Hans Andresen, was completely unknown, even at our company offices. And I know that because I was often with him when it happened, which was pretty funny. The man was very discreet. He kept an extremely low profile, but he was my advocate in this company. And if you you needed one there, because as I say, these were the Germans. These are the people that brought you World War I and World War II. So Hans Andresen was the reason I was allowed to spend, I'm pausing because I want you to get this. He's the reason I was allowed to spend $4 million finding, acquiring, restoring, converting, and preserving the Hal Roach Library as 35 millimeter safety film, fine grain masters and Dupnegs for FICA cold storage deep underground in Munich. That's where they are now, between the years of 1985 and 2002 when we finished this program. So thank you, Hans Andresen.
Yeah, absolutely. They weren't messing about.
So when we finished this program, our opposite number in the Western Hemisphere was Hallmark. You know, the Hallmark cards. So after the division of rights and equity in 1971, the line of succession in the Western Hemisphere went from Hal Roach Studios to Kintex Entertainment to Robert Halmy to RHI Entertainment, which was Robert Halmy Incorporated, I guess, to Hallmark, then back to RHI, to Sonar Entertainment, and now the corporate name is, wait for it, the corporate name now is Chicken Soup for the Soul. That's the name, so help me. I can't make this stuff up.
Chicken Soup for the Soul. That's Jack Canfield's books, isn't it?
I have no idea. You've heard of this company?
Well, I've heard of Chicken Soup for the Soul. It's a very, very popular, what would you call, like a self-improvement kind of scheme run by a guy named Jack Canfield. He's a brilliant bloke.
Well, then you're way ahead of me. Well, I don't know how brilliant he is because I just reviewed their current fiscal financial year report and they lost $16 million.
Okay, I'll rephrase that.
You know, so
it might be something totally different, but I know Chicken Soup for the Soul is a very well-known sort of brand name of all kinds of self-help books and self-improvement stuff. Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay. Well, then, as I say, you're way ahead of me, because I never heard of them till they merged or acquired Sonar. So anyhow, when I finished the nitrate conversion program, Hallmark was the owner there. Now, we shared divided copyrights, but they held property rights in the nitrate I was handling. Copyrights, property rights, very different. So at the end, they said, well, you're all done now. Thank goodness. So we won't have to keep paying all this money to store that nitrate now because we'd like to get rid of it. You gave us these new 35 millimeter safety fine grains, and we don't need the nitrate anymore, right? And they offered it all to me personally, gratis. You want Hal Roach Studios nitrate? You want to own it? All I had to do was pick up the storage bill, and I would own all the Hal Roach Studios nitrate prints and preprint elements. I'd own the property rights, not the copyrights, but the property rights. So can you imagine? Otherwise, these geniuses were going to have it all destroyed.
Good grief.
So seriously, they were going to destroy it all on purpose. Now, in some cases, we are talking about the very raw stock, the very physical raw stock that had been loaded into George Stevens' camera to record comedy being performed 10 feet away by the likes of Harry Langdon or Will Rogers or Harold Lloyd or Thelma Todd or Cary Grant or Charlie Chase, etc. So
unbelievable.
But it is unbelievable. But this, I mean, 'twas ever thus. No, and still they come. This is you think that everybody knows what we as film people know about film preservation. You think that everybody shares this attitude. They don't. They're business people. So, but this, of course, reflected the attitude of virtually all of Hollywood going way back to its origins. After the original theatrical release and re-release periods, their attitude universally and always was, we will never need these assets again. Now, along would come some sub-licensing deal, non-theatrical rights or whatever it was. Whenever one of these things would appear, they would then say the same thing. Oh, wow, this is found money for us. You want to license Laurel and Hardy for VHS or whatever it was. They make the deal and then they think we will never need these assets again. So to free up space and save storage expense, and this was all the studios throughout film history, they would purposely destroy the film, or, which was more often the case, just simply let it rot. And I think it was Universal and Goldwyn who were the worst offenders in this regard.
That's the dumbest thing I ever heard of.
You keep out of this.
I won't.
So for a while, I entertained the heady thought of personally owning all the studio nitrate for maybe a day. Then sanity prevailed, and I had Hallmark steer everything to UCLA because Rob Stone was there, and I knew he would be a worthy steward. So anyway, that's about the most important thing I've ever done in my life, to save the Hal Roach Studios nitrate film collection from purposeful destruction. Because the good folks at Hallmark, like they'd say in the TV ads, when you care enough to send the very best, they didn't care at all to save the very best, because they were not film people. Now, one more thing I want to say about Hans Andresen. Again, nobody knows his name because he didn't want his name known. It's very, very discreet. And you will not find anything about this in the myriad of books on Buster Keaton that fill up so many shelves in libraries. No one knows this. People associate the notorious Raymond Rohauer, whom I knew and I actually liked, I must admit, with the Buster Keaton revival. But it might never have happened without Hans Andresen. Hans would come to the States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to buy up all these old film libraries, primarily to fill up time on German TV. When it came to the Keaton films, he had to buy those films, the same damn films, from 3 different sources, all claiming property rights and or copyrights. So when he had made these deals, he knew one of these parties actually owned the film, so he paid all 3 of them. To promote the films, Hans Andresen conceived and financed the famous tour Keaton and Rohauer made all throughout Europe, and which launched that revival. That's how the celebration of Keaton classic films was launched. That tour, without it, who knows? I mean, and Hal Roach knew and liked Hans Andresen. Hans was a globetrotter. He had homes all over the world. And Hal Roach seldom failed to ask me, "Where is your boss now?" So those are some highlights, Patrick, and I think that about covers your second question.
What do you think of it?
It's very nice.
Brief and right to the point.
Right to the point. Yeah, I love it. That was fantastic. I mean, you touched on, Hal Roach, and you were, I think you knew him, was it about 25 years, 26 years or something?
The last 25 years of his life, the last quarter of his life.
I mean, you were such. Well, I mean, I don't have to tell you how lucky, obviously, you were. I mean, for me, I keep on saying I was born in the wrong era completely. What was it actually like to meet Hal Roach? And to spend time with him. What kind of a guy was he? What sort of a sense of humour did he have? What can you just give us a little bit of a picture, just to fill in that little sort of a blank for people like me?
Hal Roach was nothing like I expected him to be. Of course, he had a great sense of humor. But he was a dignified gentleman, a man's man, competitive, driven, someone who seized the day, someone who commanded huge respect. And I saw that all the time, the way people regarded Mr. Roach. He was Mr. Roach. I think people who are, Patrick, are you left-handed?
I'm not, no, right.
You're not. Okay, well, Hal Roach was left-handed. And I think people who are left-handed see the world through a different prism. I know that he did. And I think that was one reason he was so innovative as a producer. And as a producer, he was totally creative. Now, this should surprise people, but the man was not concerned with or motivated by money. In all the things he did, making movies, creating Santa Anita Park, the racetrack, the pioneering in television, playing football, playing polo, it was success that motivated him, the challenge to win, to be successful. He was competitive. In doing so, he made a lot of money, but it was only a side benefit of success. And then, of course, he lost most of it because he turned the studio over to his son, who was supposed to pay him on time. And 1/4 of the way through the payout, he bankrupted the studio. So Hal Roach did not live in the past. That surprises people, I think. And I'm sure nostalgia was a feeling he never experienced. I was always trying to get him to watch his films with me, which he resisted, or to talk about them in order for me to unravel some mystery. He would answer questions up to a point if I had documents or stills to show him. And I knew I had him whenever I'd show him something and he'd stare silently and then say, "Where the hell did you get this?"
Brilliant.
Now, the first time this happened was when I showed him a still you can find in the Our Gang book, in an early chapter, where he's standing outside his office next to a lineup of his directors. And I have my friend Jordan Young to thank for connecting me with that still. But eventually I'd hear this. I mean, he studied that still, but eventually I'd hear this. "Well, let's get back to the present." He always thought he could make a better film tomorrow than anything he had ever made in the past. He truly believed that. His confidence was off the charts. His whole life, he was looking ahead, always experimenting, trying to be ahead of the curve with the next great star or series or way of presenting entertainment. He always thought big. He did big things his whole life. Now, his creed in movie making was to keep it short, make it funny, emphasize visual humor, and produce clean, decent films and programming for family entertainment. And Stan Laurel, this was a problem. Stan Laurel, all the wives, the women, the moody bouts of temperament, the drunk driving arrests, the court appearances, the marital sweepstakes, the divorces you saw in Stan Laurel's private life really angered Hal Roach because he did not care for his talent to be associated with that kind of negative tabloid press. Hal Roach thought his brand name connoted clean, decent family entertainment. Now, George O'Brien was somebody I got to know, another hero of mine. Okay, so he played polo against Hal. And so I asked George to characterize the man, and this is what he said. "Hal Roach was a rock'em sock'em guy. If you were on his side, great. If not, you better get the hell out of his way," end quote. Now that said everything. That really said it. But it's not to say he wasn't personable and persuasive, because he was, and in spades. If he wanted to sell you on something, you'd pretty quickly be disarmed. And he was still charming ladies in his 80s and 90s, of which I saw lots of evidence. Now this may not be a fair or full characterization, but I'll relate one incident. Now, he favored, and his films favored, visual humor, sight gags, because he came out of silent films. So when you were with him, he related stories that created a word picture in your mind. He did not tell jokes. He was always the center of attention that way, telling these stories to illustrate points he wished to make. And while he could be funny, he was less interested in anyone else being funny. So anyway, I get these phone calls from him. "How'd you like to have a pheasant dinner tonight?" Hal always had great dogs he took on hunting excursions. The one I knew best was a black lab retriever named Tripper. When Hal wanted to give Tripper a workout, he'd phone to see if I could go to Chino with him, south of LA, where in the midst of a lot of dairy farms, there was a game preserve. So we'd go down there and buy game preserves, pheasants, ducks, chuckers, and I'd throw one up in the air to its doom, and Hal would blast the hell out of him. If he missed, then it was my turn. And a bird would drop, and Hal would release Tripper by just exclaiming his name. Then Tripper would race out there like a shot. You'd see a cloud of dust, and Tripper would then proudly return with the bird in his mouth. And he'd circle Hal, present the bird. Hal would then hand me the bird. And if the bird wasn't dead, he'd say, "Wring his neck." Because that was the humane way to handle things.
Yeah.
Of course, after we'd shot him, we were going to be humane and wring his neck. So then later at Hal's house, we'd have pheasants or ducks or chuckers for dinner, but you'd have to spit out the pellets. It's the truth. So well, on one of these excursions, and we'd always dress in old clothes because we'd be out there in the dirt and chasing birds. So this one particular day, I wore an old yellow sweatshirt I'd had since college. There was a stick drawing on it of a cow, a bull actually. Now, so this is a visual thing. He likes visual humor. So I didn't select this to send any kind of a message to him. I just grabbed an old ragged sweatshirt that I'd had for years. And on the sweatshirt with this stick drawing of a cow was a word. BULLSHIRT, bullshirt. Well, I showed up at Hal's house in Bel Air, ready to roll, and he stops dead in his tracks. He sees this sweatshirt. He glares at me and asks, "Is that your idea of humor?" He was dead serious. He was not amused.
Oh, love it.
Now, later, I shared this with his 3 beautiful daughters who well understood my predicament that day. And of course, they thought it was hilarious. In other words, he could be funny, but you could not.
That's great.
Okay, now you asked me before which comedians did Hal Roach?
Yeah.
Now he had a key measure. He said a key measure for him was always, can someone build and then sustain comedy where it gets better as you go along? And he'd use his hands to show, and I saw him do this scores of times. He'd use his hands to show a visual graph in the air where the comedy values had to slope upwards as you go along. And then if you lost the audience at some point and then had to climb back to that steep point where it happened, get back up there, how hard that was going to be. So the longer the film, the tougher it was going to be to get the laughter where it needed to be and to stay there. He would harp on that time and again, and as proof, point out that all the artists he might name as the best comedians, they did their best work in short subjects, not long features.
Yeah.
And it was visual humor and sight gags that he was drawn to, because that's what he specialized in. And especially when that kind of thing was based on the innocence of children or grown-ups who still retained in part the innocence of children, which was why he felt the characters of Laurel and Hardy could not work as they grew old, and he was right. So that was his brand of comedy, not someone who reports comedy or someone who tells jokes. Visual comedy was what he wanted and what he liked. So with that in mind, the top 5 comedians he gave me in order. Number 1, Charlie Chaplin, whom he worked with. Harold Lloyd, number 2, who worked for him. Number 3, Roscoe Arbuckle, which surprised me. Number 4, Laurel and Hardy. And number 5, Buster Keaton, who he thought about hiring when the opportunity presented itself in the mid-30s. But it was going to be risky because of that alcoholic breakdown. Plus, he knew Metro was going to frown on it because they'd really expelled him. And it would have been for shorts at first because except that the studio was transitioning away from shorts to feature films in order to survive. But the key thing Hal said was that for Keaton to be good, he had to work at his own pace, and that he took a long, long time to make a picture. So Keaton likely would not have fit the studio's production formula, although it did make the trades in 1937 that Hal was going to team Keaton with Patsy Kelly in features. But of course, that didn't happen. And another thing he thought hurt Keaton with the public, his visual gags were spectacular, but he was a little too cerebral. He thought that was why even Keaton's great feature films did not always connect with the great unwashed masses out there, and gross the way Chaplin's and Lloyd's did, because both Lloyd and Chaplin did much better at the box office than Keaton did. I think that will surprise people too. Now, I never met Buster Keaton. Leonard Maltin did. I didn't, but I knew Eleanor Keaton well, and she made me a genuine Buster Keaton pork pie hat out of my grandfather's gray Stetson fedora, and she signed it for me.
Wonderful.
Buster's mother taught Eleanor how to do that after they got married in 1937, and if you got to know her, you mentioned that hat, she'd say, well, if you've got an old fedora, I can make a genuine Buster Keaton hat for you. So she
did. Wonderful. That's great.
But coming back to Arbuckle, though William Randolph Hearst was a friend of Hal's, and even a better friend of Hal's wife, Margaret, but not in any kind of romantic way, it was the Hearst papers that crucified Arbuckle. Hal said that Arbuckle was, in one of his favorite phrases, 100% innocent. And we know from Stan Laurel's prolific correspondence that he felt the same way. I have signed original studio contracts, not Xeroxes, but the actual contracts, where twice Hal Roach tried to sign Roscoe Arbuckle and bring him back to movie audiences.
Wow, didn't know that.
Yep. Metro execs killed the first try. They weren't having it. And then before it even got to Metro, or maybe it did, I don't know. But the second time, I can't remember the name of the women's club, but some national women's club killed the second try. Now, also, Hal liked the humor of W.C. Fields a lot, but he wasn't primarily a visual comedian. And Harry Langdon was a friend of his, but Hal did not include Langdon in his top five. And before he entered movies in 1914, Hal Roach had a crush on Mabel Normand, who sadly was falling apart by the time he was able to hire her in 1926. Now, another surprise was the then new comedian he named over and over in the 1980s. So, Patrick, can you guess who that might be? I can give you a hint.
Go on.
He was English. 1980s. I heard him say this all the time because people would always ask him.
Sellers?
No.
I don't know. You'll have to tell me. I don't know. I can't think.
Benny Hill.
Benny, of course. He's big in the States, isn't he, Benny Hill? Yeah.
From the time Hal knew Chaplin in the mid-teens, he was focused on the Fred Carnot troupe, the Commedia dell'arte, and any new comedian working on the stage in England. Hal was always searching for talent wherever he went. He was always watching movies, seeing stage shows. I mean, that's how he found Henry Brandon for Babes in Toyland. He was always doing this, always out there looking. Whenever he was in London, he made a point to see whomever was working there, whoever was hot. But he would say over and over how much he liked Benny Hill. Quote, if only he would get above the belt. He said that punctuated every time he would praise Benny Hill. He always, if only he would get above the belt, meaning drop the dirty material. But he really liked Benny Hill.
I think that's why it doesn't sort of occur to me, because, as you say, Hal Roach's comedies were so wholesome and family kind of friendly, if you like, to use that phrase. I wouldn't have put that together at all. Yeah, that surprised me.
I wouldn't have guessed that either. It always surprised me. I wasn't particularly a fan of Benny Hill, but so one other note about who Hal liked. He was a friend of Chico Marx because of Santa Anita and horse racing and betting, and of course Harpo Marx was purely visual.
Yeah,
but Hal did not care for Groucho personally. I think they shot the You Bet Your Life TV pilot at Hal Roach Studios, and that experience soured Hal on Groucho because you couldn't have a meaningful conversation with the guy. He was always joking and always negative. Everything you'd say to him was perceived as a setup for a gag. That got to be annoying because you couldn't ever communicate. And one more. Hal would never have been able to work with Jerry Lewis, whom he said was so undisciplined, and also that their two comedy styles were completely different. Lewis played a spoiled kid, and I know Rob Stone, Leonard Maltin. Well, so I'm in the minority. I'm not a fan of Jerry Lewis either. But
I'm not. I'm with you, Richard, on that one.
Okay, so he always played a spoiled kid, whereas the kids in our gang were always sympathetic, so you pulled for them. They weren't brash and annoying like Jerry Lewis. And I know that there was media speculation. I never talked to Hal about this, but I have clippings that following the bankruptcy that Hal Roach would come out of retirement and produce for Jerry Lewis, but that never would have worked. So.
Well, that covers a lot of ground. Say, you cover a lot of ground yourself. You better beat it. I hear they're going to tear you down and put up an office building where you're standing. You can leave in a taxi. If you can't get a taxi, you can leave in a huff. If that's too soon, you can leave in a minute and a huff. You know, you haven't stopped talking since I came here. You must have been vaccinated with a phonograph needle.
Let me just ask you one question. And this is just coming from the top of my head because it's something I've been writing about just today, and it's something that's been kind of mulling around. I just want to see if Hal ever mentioned this to you. We talked at the start about how serious Hal Roach was about his comedies being taken seriously. And, you know, when you look through all the trade papers spanning from the 20s and the 30s, there's always a studio line of, I was looking at one today. F. Richard Jones was saying, short comedies should be seen with the same kind of prestige as feature films. Warren Doan said it again in, I think it was 28. He held a big luncheon at the studios, and he was saying exactly the same thing. And then Hal Roach again, when sort of the double feature was coming along, he was also saying we've got to be on par with features. We should be billed equally with feature films. Was this kind of a big thing for him? Was it always nagging at him? This is what I'm sort of trying to get at. Was it something that he felt a sense of injustice about? Because obviously he put so much care and thought into his films, from the sets, the people behind the camera, the people in front of the camera, just everything, the costumes. It was all quality stuff, and did he ever mention that to you, Richard, about this is something that got at him at all?
Not specifically, but I would say comedy was his business, and as I've covered, comedies were better when they were brief, when they were short, and so short comedies was his business, and he, as you say, he was serious about them, and in 1930, when the double bill phenomenon started in Boston, and began crowding short subjects off of theater bills, he saw it was going to hurt his business. So, I mean, if you're in the business of making short comedies, you want to see them get the proper promotion on theater marquees and in advertising for them, because you want people to notice them and demand them so that you succeed in your business.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. So I just had this sort of visualization of the vice presidents at Roach all sitting around together thinking, right, we've got to get the status, the perceived status of short comedies up, and and it was almost like a crusade for him for years and years. But it's fascinating reading.
Well, again, that's the business they're in. So if that's the product they're offering, they want them to be successful. They want people to say how good they are and to give them the proper recognition.
Right, wonderful stuff. I could listen to you forever, Richard. You've got some great memories. And
we haven't got to their purple moment.
I was going to say, we probably better talk about the film in focus a little bit as well. Yeah, let's do that now. So, yeah, their purple moment. I know you said you haven't had a chance to sort of rescreen it, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the picture, Richard? And how do you think it sort of compares with the other Laurel and Hardy films from that same period?
Okay, their purple moment. I like the first scene, how Stan has to knock on his own front door for his wife to let him in the house.
Yes.
That's pretty funny, right? So right away, you've got a great gag. But it's definitely a lesser entry from their prime period of silent classics, though still good. We know Robert Youngson thought so, too, because he waited until going through all the other silent shorts, 14 years of them, to finally excerpt this film in his compilations, before finally having to resort to using this last untouched one for his last comedy anthology film, Four Clowns in 1970. So it's not great compared to the others, but still, how could you miss making at least a good picture with major talents like Hal Roach, Leo McCarey, George Stevens, Stan Laurel, and Oliver Hardy? So the picture was shot, as you know, February of 1928, right after Your Darn Tootin' and before Should Married Men Go Home, both of which are better. And I wonder if one reason is because their purple moment is less a showcase for Hardy than it is for Laurel.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Who was really funny in several long scenes, where the ones where he needs to get over his bewilderment upon finding his money's gone.
Yeah.
And here's something to watch for. And those scenes in particular, something to watch for, especially if you have, or maybe you need to have a beautiful low generation copy to screen, because it's a subtle maneuver by the future Oscar-winning director George Stevens, who later made so many great films that I love. Now, as we know, Stan Laurel was partial towards this white pancake makeup, and he always wanted flat lighting, which is why he liked the Art Lloyd, because Art did what Stan wanted. But this flat lighting provided a sense of innocence for his characterization. And in those several close-ups where Stan has to register all the emotions associated with the disaster he is quietly awaiting of having no money in a nightclub after big meals for everyone and a bigger bill, what Stevens does, he throws this horizontal lighting right onto his face, and just his face, sort of focused on it. It was so-called key light as opposed to fill light. You're not supposed to notice it. You have to look for it. That's Stevens' artistry. You have to look for that. But that's what Stevens does, right into his face with that bright light. Now, you know, imagine, try having a conversation with someone when there's a horizontal spotlight crashing right onto your face. So keep that in mind when you watch Stan Laurel just tick off one emotion after another. He just runs right through. You can read his mind with, it's all right there on his face.
Yeah. And
perfectly illuminated by George Stevens. And I wanted to share this reminiscence. I went and found this where George Stevens, this is George Stevens speaking, where he talks about, quote, the artfulness of guys like Laurel and Hardy, who had an extraordinary sense of it. When they put the team of Laurel and Hardy together, I was their cameraman. I didn't know that comedy could be so graceful and beautiful until I met Laurel and Hardy. I didn't know how comedy was so humane. And I looked at these two men and I realized that these two guys understood human nature. By some artistic instinct, they had this wonderful business of being in touch with the human condition. I had worked with each of them separately. It was a good job for a young fellow, a lot of fun. I truly felt part of something. I was very close with Babe Hardy, and Stan had an interest in me. I was younger than the other cameraman he'd had. He liked some of the things I did and didn't like other things, like the stuff that tended to be a little arty. He wasn't too happy when he could see that coming, stuff that was ruining his comedy. I had to be pretty careful it didn't happen. So still quoting George Stevens here, with films like Laurel and Hardy's, your existence is maintained by the fact that the audience laughs. If they don't laugh, there is a vacuum, a disaster. Laurel and Hardy were marvelous clowns, but also humanists. Although the story was not always immediately present in their films, their humanism gave them validity. You could watch an audience respond to these structured situations and gags that were premised to eventually evoke a laugh. If the scene gives the audience what they expect, then they laugh. So the game is to promise them what they expect, then give them something they wished they had thought of. Then they really laugh. If it's something utterly beyond their imagination, they ask, why didn't I think of that? By laying out the mechanics of this, it doesn't take anything away from its artfulness, end quote.
Wonderful.
So we get an idea of why George Stevens was one of the medium's truly genius cinematographers and directors. So Stevens was the cinematographer standing next to Jack Roach for the export neg, which is what most everything is sourced from these last 60 years. So what we're looking at is what Jack Roach shot, not Stevens orchestrated the lighting and the camera setups, but anyway, so they were the cinematographers, but who was the director? Now, their Purple Moment marks the first happy collaboration of Laurel and Hardy with their longtime director, the younger brother of Charlie Chase, James Parrott. But maybe this was another hindrance, though, working together for the first time with maybe there was a clash of styles. We know Edgar Kennedy had been directing the boys, and during the windup that was shot for this film, but replaced. We have Edgar Kennedy as playing a cop. So James Parrott is their new director, and it was originally going to be Fred Gill, whose younger sister Clara plays the waitress or the cigarette girl who presents a bill to Stan for treating the midgets. Now, there's a lot I could say about James Parrott, but it's too involved, and I don't want to go off into the deep weeds on all that. So I'll talk about another problem I want to mention. I think the plotting involves too many characters, and maybe that's why the pacing is off. One other complicating factor could have been that Hal Roach was absent on a long vacation to save his marriage and wasn't there to scrutinize and pass on the dailies. He was, however, always in constant touch through reports and telegrams, but that wasn't the same as watching the dailies and personally interacting with his staff. Hal Roach was, I think, you would call him an intuitive rather than an intellectual filmmaker. And had he been there to sign off on the dailies, I think he would have seen the problem with all the characters and the complicated plotting. That's how those films were made. Everyone at the studio served at the pleasure of their boss. Now, they all said, this is the best boss. Patsy Kelly said that all the time. Hal Roach was the best boss I ever had in this business, and I was practically ashamed to take the money. But that reflected the way that everybody at the studio felt about Mr. Roach. And so everything was catered to his approval. And most of those films, and I mean from all the series at the studio throughout its history, began with a raw idea, just an idea that Hal Roach would conceive. And then he'd turn it over to his staff to develop it. They'd shoot scenes. And if he saw something in the dailies he didn't like, it was changed until he did like it and approve it. There's a phrase, that's where the music played at Hal Roach Studios, in that screening room and inside his office. That's where the things happened that kept those films on track. And I don't want to go, maybe another time I would have something to say about the recent Stan and Ollie film.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll do that another time. That sounds good.
But I hesitate to say anything now because it becomes a long story. But Stan Laurel and Hal Roach would never have had the conversation that you see in that film out in the open. Any problems? First of all, Stan Laurel would never have spoken to Hal Roach that way. And if there was a disagreement, and they did have disagreements, creative disagreements, it would have been handled in the privacy of Hal Roach's office. Because that's the way Hal Roach exercised discreet control in creating the comedies we all love. On their purple moment, he wasn't there to serve that function. And maybe they missed his guidance. In other words, he wasn't there to impose what we know now as the studio house style and correct matters when his staff went off the rails a bit. Now, one key thing I learned from all the Hal Roach Studios alumni I knew, the first and last law of comedy at the Lot of Fun was please the boss. His entire life, Hal Roach was a leader, always the guy in charge. I mean, I say this, but I reflect what I've heard from these alumni, where they would say, this man was an authentic genius, the dominant force at that studio, and everyone depended on him and looked for him to lead the way. And again, most of the films at his studio began with a raw idea that Hal Roach himself would share with the writers and or the star of any given unit. So I find this really interesting that while the paperwork for the copyright registrations for most of the studio's films credit Hal Roach as author, on their purple moment, he wasn't around when the story was conceived, so that the certification affidavit document on file at the Library of Congress states that the authors of this story were James Parrott and Leo McCarey.
Right. Okay.
Or whatever that's worth. Now, their purple moment was a season-ending picture and marked the last time a Laurel and Hardy short subject would be issued under the All-Stars name.
Yes. Yeah.
We spoke a little bit about that in correspondence, and Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy had clearly earned a promotion because all stars meant no stars, really, and as the new, I mean, really, all stars, there are no stars there. They're all stars, but they're not stars. And as the new team was fast ascending in importance, Laurel and Hardy deserved to make shorts separately branded as Laurel and Hardy Comedies. And this new Laurel and Hardy series would replace the sadly unsung Max Davidson series. And a few years ago, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago now, I'm not sure of the date, we licensed a Max Davidson box set of DVDs in Germany that I worked on, and I contributed an essay explaining how the Jews who ran MGM were embarrassed by the ethnic humor in these films. No matter how innocent and genial, they asked Roach to cancel the series. And I was disappointed that our DVD failed to launch a full-scale revival for the Davidson shorts, because I thought this would happen because those are great films. I really thought there'd be controversy so that we'd get a lot of publicity and there'd be a lot of interest out of Germany. Germany, mind you, Germany of all countries, trying to celebrate a Jew born in Berlin, portraying what some regard as a negative stereotypical character. Pardon me, but the Jews who ran Metro, who came from Eastern European countries, and particularly the men in charge, Louis B. Mayer and Nick Skink, both Jews born in Russia, they saw themselves as reinventing themselves in America and wanted to leave behind what they regarded as stereotypical reminders. Leave them back in the old country. That's what it was, and it was too bad. So, as mentioned, I didn't have a chance to screen the film, but I reread my essay for the official Laurel and Hardy website, which I think is still up there, and I looked through the stills and the shooting script. Now, sometimes the script, I have the shooting script. Sometimes the script gives indications as to casting, but this one does not. As you probably know, Patrick, the planned ending in that script, which we have over 4 8x14-inch legal size single space pages, so it's pretty detailed. The ending did not play. The script was actually faithfully adapted up until that ending, which I find surprising when I see that it was faithfully adapted. But But the ending did not play. So they went back into production and shot a new finish. And that meant more stills. And I think I have them all, maybe 35, 40. So in going through them, well, here are some observations. I have these stills. Now that house where the Laurels live, and the Hardys stop by. Oh, and this is the first domestic comedy for Laurel and Hardy, a precursor of what we see later on, variations of this material and better efforts like, oh, Blotto, We Fall Down, Be Big, Below Zero, Sons of the Desert, etc. And they were phasing out of the period where they were given funny character names in the script. The story concerns the lack of money. So Laurel and his miserly screen wife, Fay Holderness, are Mr. and Mrs. Pincher. Now later, of course, she would memorably be Mrs. Hardy in Hog Wild. So you have a story of philandering husbands in Laurel and Hardy's world of perennially, petty, greedy, domineering, shrewish, and vindictive wives. And they're always harridans, conniving, ill-tempered, as Mr. Laurel says in Helpmates, looking at a framed photo of Mrs. Hardy. Isn't she sweet? I say that all the time.
Yes.
I see somebody, isn't she sweet? Well, some people know what I'm talking about. They laugh, others don't. Well,
That's my wife. Isn't she sweet? Charming.
But off screen, Mr. Roach was experiencing marital difficulties himself, while Mr. Laurel's wife Lois had just given birth to their daughter before Christmas, and then had to go back into hospital for a major operation. Mr. Hardy was then periodically also on the verge of divorce, being married to an alcoholic who was sadly in and out of sanitariums. Yet somehow all these people had to show up at Hal Roach Studios on Washington Boulevard in Culver City and create these great comedies, with this being the first domestic one. So that house, and so Patrick, that house. Have you ever been to Los Angeles but don't you want to make a pilgrimage to LA and visit all these Laurel and
Hardy? Don't. It's a dream. Yeah, it's an absolute dream. I'd love to one day.
To stand where they stood, to get in touch with the ghosts you can feel at these places. So locations have always been a big thing to me. I remember when I got the first issue of Pratfall. I was living in St. Paul, and they had a Then and Now segment for a series of photos for Men of War. I just about died when I saw that. Visiting these locations is a big deal for me. Anyway, so back to that house. In case you want to find it and visit this location someday, here's what you do. You'll get onto Washington Boulevard in Culver City, running east away from the ocean, and it goes right by Thomas H. Ince's Triangle Lot, which became MGM, which is now Sony. And then right next door, you go by the second big, again, Thomas H. Ince lot, which became RKO, Pathé, Selznick, etc. It's now Amazon. And don't get me started on that. and then Hal Roach Studios, which, as we all know, is gone. But if you continue east on Washington Boulevard until you get near to downtown LA, then you go south a few blocks at Normandy being a big street, and you cross the Santa Monica Freeway, which wasn't there a century ago. You get to 1750 West 22nd Street. You can see the house number right on the curb, 1750, not exactly a garden spot today. In 1992, the intersection of Florence and Normandy was the flashpoint of the notorious 1992 Rodney King LA riots here.
Wow.
Yep, but that's the house, that's the neighborhood. And to give proper credit, I think it was Brad Farrell of the Suns who found it and Chris Bungo, who does all the great then and now videos.
Yeah.
He says it was built in 1905. 1905. So the house is still recognizable, but has a big fence around it today. I've seen it, and it's probably a necessity.
I was going to say, yeah, you probably want a big fence around you.
Unfortunately, when I came to LA, I mentioned Jordan Young before. I said to him at the time when I moved out here, because I'd come here from New York, I thought LA is a paradise, and he laughed at me like, you must be out of your mind. But so many neighborhoods in LA now, as you may know, you'll find out when you get here. Los Angeles really isn't a city. It's a collection of connected little cities, and most of them are not very pleasant. And you drive through them, and you see bars on the windows, like this house, and big fence around it today. So, but back then, chances are that somebody at the studio lived there. That was usually the case, but I've never tried to figure out who it was. So that's one thing. Another still shows Jack Hill as the doorman outside the Pink Pup, which was located on the back lot. There was no actual Pink Pup anywhere in LA that I have ever heard of. Now, other stills portraying the interior show the same Mr. Hill sitting alone at a table as a diner. Now, we're not supposed to notice he has two parts.
Yeah.
That's a good trick on us. So,
Yeah.
So, and it's incidentally, if I had ever pointed that out to Mr. Roach, that he had an actor playing two different parts in the same movie, and I asked why, this, as Mel Torme used to say to me, this is the response I'd get. Now wait for it. Here's what he would say. What the hell? He was working for me, and he did what I told him. And I can say that because that is exactly what he said. Exactly the time I asked why he had a great comedy star like Charlie Chase in the role of an unsympathetic heavy in King of Wild Horses. What the hell? He was working for me, and he did what I told him.
I love it. That's superb.
So that ended that conversation.
Oh, brilliant.
I had to go on to something else. Or a second way he might have responded, because I heard this from him too. Quote, if that's what you're looking at in any given scene, we've failed, we've lost you, because we've lost you as far as the story and comedy are concerned.
Brilliant.
So Hal Roach was a man of strong opinions and very definite ideas. Now, another still, and I'll give you the number, S10-26, the S standing for star is in All-Star Series. Now you have to pay close attention. It shows Ed Brandenburg as a waiter taking a dive into a tray of food he is carrying. That's a still photo. Now, Ed Brandenburg does play a waiter in the actual motion picture, but he never ends up on the floor next to Laurel with a face full of mashed potatoes, at least not in the export neg from which My 16 was struck, and which I believe is the source, for every version of their Purple Moment available to see anywhere today. But I do imagine the domestic neg would be the same, the one George Stevens shot. So they filmed that scene, or maybe it was a rehearsal, and then they took a still photo. But someone must not have liked that particular take. So that footage never appears in the finished motion picture. Ed Brandenburg never winds up spilled onto the floor in the actual film.
Right.
The performer who takes all those falls that you do see in the film is his brother, Chet Brandenburg. Now, in Randy's wonderful new phone book-sized tome, which, by the way, is so heavy, so packed full of great stuff, you can't possibly carry it around. So you really do need to have a copy in each room of the house for ready reference.
Yes.
Randy asks in print there, quote, wish we knew the name of the waiter who takes 3 headers into trays full of mashed potatoes, end quote. And I wish he'd asked me that question because I could have told him it was Chet Brandenburg.
And, I was going to say, I didn't think we knew who it was, going on Randy's book, right.
And also, not only Randy's, but other filmographies too, also list Ed Brandenburg in error as a pink pup patron, but he isn't. That fellow was actually neither Brandenburg brother, if you follow this, and you probably can't. Although I don't know who that random guy might be. I've never seen him in any other movie.
Who's that fella?
Never mind him. There are more important things to think of.
But in case you have the big picture book that I did with Jack McCabe and Al Kilgore, I looked this up. Look on page 66. The tray-laden waiter on the floor there, that is Ed Brandenburg, and you don't see him being tripped that way in the film. Page 68 shows his brother on the floor with a face full of food, and that's Chet Brandenburg. Now, if it was Hal Roach explaining this point, which he wouldn't ever do anyway, but he wouldn't tolerate this kind of detail. But if it was Hal Roach explaining this point, he'd finish by asking, "Is that clear?" And it was always really more of a command. He'd say, "Is that clear?" I heard a lot, and so did his daughters, who thought that was funny when I told them.
Brilliant.
But then here's where I screwed up. Now it's my turn to be wrong, and I can only plead as an excuse that I did this 50 years ago when I was young, erroneous, and incorrect. And now I'm old and maybe a little less erroneous and incorrect. But 50 years ago, I had never seen a Jimmy Aubrey comedy, or alleged comedy, because they're not funny. Actually, no one should see a Jimmy Aubrey alleged comedy, because Jimmy Aubrey, anytime in any film, was neither likable nor funny. And that goes for off-screen and on screen.
Yeah, so I believe, yeah.
But I don't know how he worked. I really don't. But in two different books, each written 50 years ago, I have Mr. Aubrey essaying the role of the chef in that film. Wrong.
Ah, yes, I've read that. Yeah.
Wrong. It was Jack Lloyd. So mea culpa. I'd seen Jimmy Aubrey get soup dumped on him, and That's My Wife, and thought that's the same man.
But no, we can link that though, can't we? Because if you think Jack Lloyd was in Lucky Dog, wasn't he?
Yes.
Was he in drag?
I can't remember what.
I think he was in drag at the start. Is Stan's landlady? I think it was, and then also linked with the Lucky Dog. Wasn't it Jimmy Aubrey that sacked his crew, who came to work with Anderson?
That's exactly right.
So there is a connection. So we'll give you that.
Okay.
It's tenuous, but we'll give you that.
That's a real stretch, Patrick. So I've got more stills here, and there are several from a scene cut from the finish, showing the boys retreating into the midgets' dressing room.
Oh yes.
Now one of these is really special. It's not only from a cut scene, but from a killed still from a cut scene. More than half of this still has been torn off, which is too bad. That's how the studio killed stills they didn't want to release or have it get out somehow. Now, in this still, Laurel and Hardy are each holding a midget in his arms, definitely out of character and beaming. Laurel is looking right into Stax Graves' still photo camera, looking great. And best of all, the boys are flanking their new director, James Parrott, and he is standing there in his full arterial splendor, wearing a dress hat, vest, and heavy topcoat. And I mentioned heavy topcoat because they were shooting in February, and those sound stages could get cold. So keep that in mind the next time you screen their Purple Moment.
Yeah.
Everybody's probably working in I don't know what the temperature would be, but I mean, if you see this photograph, Parrott is dressed to stay warm.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, it's a great shot. I've never seen it published. I guess you wouldn't publish it because it's been torn in half.
I think it deserves publishing. I think we need to sort that out.
Okay.
I'd love to see it. If you could send me a copy of that,
okay.
Richard, I'd love to see that.
Okay. So another still from a deleted scene shows Stan and Ollie trying to operate a Victrola, only to have the turntable spring off.
Yeah.
This gag was too good to lose, however, so as I'm sure you know, they worked it into the next film, Should Married Men Go Home, and you'll see it there. A still photo S10-3 shows Stan holding a record featuring maybe Chinese or Japanese songs, I don't know which, but he's purchased this record for his wife, played by, again, as we mentioned, Fay Holderness, who, like Mr. Hardy, would occasionally, maybe you've noticed this, she would steal a glance at the camera every once in a while. I know she does that in Hog Wild.
Yeah.
They let her do that. So, and as I say, of course, we know her as Ollie's wife in Hog Wild, where he has been compelled to put up a radio aerial on the roof as, quote, Mrs. Hardy wants to get Japan. So you have to wonder, I mean, at least I do, because maybe I need a sanity hearing, but I have to wonder, when they made Hog Wild, were they thinking of this scene from their purple moment?
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, just linking it to...
As Stan Laurel says in Going Bye-Bye, it could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. I love Fay Holderness's reaction when Stan kisses her on the cheek as well. She says, "How dare you?"
Really? You cannot be serious. How dare you? That's right. So the same still has the happy couple posing in front of a large portrait showing Stan's supposed grandfather, in which there is a secret compartment that folds out for Stan to hide the money from his dear wife. Now, the distinguished-looking actor in the portrait was someone named Frederick Sullivan. There has to be a story here, but I don't know what it is. There is another portrait of the same man used in the Laurel and Hardy murder case, I think, but this actor never performed in any Roach film I can think of.
Strange.
He does, it really is. He does perform in the Marx Brothers Duck Soup, which was directed by Leo McCarey. So is McCarey the connection and the explanation? I don't know. And a curious thing about that midget troupe. So here's something else I cannot explain. The most popular story that circulated about the 1939 version of The Wizard of Oz was how the midgets stayed at the Culver City Hotel during production, having wild parties and a lot of great sex. Now, I have a still in my Their Purple Moment file showing a huge gathering of midgets assembled at the hotel's front door outside, which I know very well, and beneath a sign that read, quote, "Largest number of little people ever assembled under one roof in America, 1928.
Wow.
And none of them are munchkins." And this was not 1938, but 1928, the year Their Purple Moment was made.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Was there a connection? Again, I don't know. Since I have lunch there every Tuesday with friends, I've asked the Culver City Hotel management and owners if they have any explanation for the many midgets gatherings there through the years. Why do midgets flock to the Culver City Hotel? America wants to know, and I don't have an answer.
It's obviously a great place for sex, isn't it?
Well, that's what we hear. I don't know. I don't know.
I've never been in a position like that before. Well, it's certainly a pleasure to have seen you again.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So finally, on some media where this film can be viewed, there's a key title card missing near the end. The one where Hardy blames Laurel for dragging him, quote, into this den of vice. And without that title card, you have no motivation for Laurel turning on Hardy the way he does. And as mentioned, the camera negative that we worked from, the only one that the one that exists, had flash titles, and by the 1970s, this one had deteriorated. It wasn't that someone along the line deleted it for whatever reason. We know the inner titles were always on cheaper stock intended to decompose sooner, and that's what happened to this one. But without that Beanie Walker title card, you have a gap in the continuity. And maybe one other thing. That betrayal of Mr. Laurel precipitates an inevitable, what would you call it, pastry slinging melee at the end.
Yes,
And-
bit of a food fight.
And I read in my essay that 40 years ago, in 1981, I asked Hal Roach why the sequence replaced the original ending. I had to refresh his recollection as to what picture and what sequences were under discussion because he didn't follow me at first. I should say, once his pictures were successfully previewed, he paid no attention to most of them for the rest of his life. Paid no attention to them. It was life or death to him while they were being made. He was focused on them. It was life or death. But as soon as he had a successful preview, that was it. On to the next thing, because he did not ever live in the past. Never, never, never. On to the next thing. So he didn't know what I was talking about at first. So I read from the script, and I described in detail the alternate ending that was used. Neither impressed him, but I think he took my question as a challenge, and I'll read what he said. Quote, "By bringing this up, you suggest we made a mistake changing the windup. I say you are projecting your hopes into what you read in the script, just as we did. A lot of the time, what's written does not play. The routine with the midgets, escaping as midgets, did not pay off in the screening room or the preview, whatever it was. Otherwise, we would have kept it. The business with the pies may not have been great, but that always worked with audiences. We didn't have time for anything better. So run your print with an audience and then come back and tell me if we did the right thing changing it," end quote.
That's great, isn't it?
So in other words, on to the next thing. And this didn't come from Hal Roach Studios, but there's that line about cheap independent films that may not be good, but they'll be done by Friday. You've got a deadline. You've got to finish. You've got to put something there. So what can we do quick and easy and fast? And because this picture has play dates, it's been booked. So that's what they did. It's easy for us to sit here and say, well, this can't compare with the battle of the century, that pie fight. Why would they do this on the cheap? Well, like I said before, you're working on a picture, you don't always get your way. And what you are focused on, what you are interested in, may be at strict variance with the guy working next to you. So it may not be good, but it'll be in theaters on Friday.
It's just, I find it such a shame because it's like it's one of those films that just stops, and you can think, oh, hang on, what happens to why are the girls so hungry, for starters? Why were the girls so hungry? They've just eaten a load of food with two other guys.
I'm gonna get to that.
Oh, right, okay.
I think
it's also like habeas corpus. I think that just ends. There's a load of action. It just stops.
Well,
hang on.
The time was up. We filled up 2 minutes.
That's it. Exactly,
thing.
Yeah.
What the hell are you waiting for? That's what he would say. But here's something else. Hal said, but not to me. I have an undated clipping, and Patrick, you could probably source it through Lantern with the headline, "You ain't seen nothing yet," is what Hal Roach says. That's "You ain't seen nothing yet" is what Hal Roach says. I don't know the date of the source.
Oh, okay.
I just have what he says. Now we know he went on that world tour with his wife after he did something I'm not going to talk about. And he was in New York when he was quoted saying, this is the quote, "We brought Laurel and Hardy out slowly last year, but this year we're giving them plenty of rope. Their purple moment is a scream. The way it rocked New York audiences at the Capitol Theater a week ago was a revelation to me. You've probably seen it by now and know what it is," end quote. And I'll just say one other thing about that. A lot of us, what I always say to people, I say this to my dear friend, Dave Lord Heath. I can't interest him in ever going to a Sons of the Desert gathering, but I've said this to him and I've said this to a lot of people. The way to see these films is the way they were meant to be seen by the people who created them. That is to say, on a large screen in a darkened theater with a respectful audience without any kind of interruption, because that's where the magic happens. That's something intangible happens in that circumstance. But for many of us, you'd buy in my case, you'd buy a 16 millimeter print of something from Blackhawk Films, and you'd run it somewhere in the house, all alone, you wonder why they did one thing or another. But when you see these films in front of an audience, I'll tell you one thing about Wrong Again. I was at a film festival in Amiens, I think that's how you say it, which is right outside of Paris. In the right around, maybe it's about 30 years ago now. And at that film festival, on the program for one particular morning, they were going to run Wrong Again at the theater. So I had nothing better to do, and I had responsibilities at that film festival. I had nothing to do that morning, and I thought, well, I'll go watch Wrong Again. So I went into this theater, and they had bussed into the neighborhood and that theater hundreds of first and second and third grade kids. So the audience was almost exclusively these little tiny kids. Now they speak French. This film is made in English in America. It's a silent film. Have they ever seen Laurel and Hardy? Probably not. Did they have any idea what's happening in this film? I have no idea. I have no idea myself. But the film starts, and this hundreds of kids, they started laughing. And the laughter came in waves and never stopped. The entire 20 minutes, the laughter went up, the laughter went down, but it subsided, but it never stopped. So, and all these little gags that Laurel and Hardy invested in these films, they paid off. I mean, transcending language barriers, time barriers, cultural barriers. Every one of these little visual gags, one after another, they came to life in front of this audience of little tiny kids. I never forgot that. That was
wonderful.
That was
lovely.
Such a lesson to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what made me think of that is what Hal says, the way it rocked New York audiences at the Capitol Theater a week ago was a revelation to me. Just like I say, Wrong Again was a revelation to me that day, and I'll never forget it. And we know he was telling the truth because in their confirming review, based on the same play dates at the same theater, the New York Daily Mirror stated, quote, "Their purple moment at the Capitol Theater is not the feature, but it is a classic of the slapstick school. Actual howls go up all over the house, provoked by the antics and misfortune of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy as the pair of escaped husbands. The two comedians are marvelous. Plump Mr. Hardy and his arch little smile, lean Mr. Laurel with his embarrassing inclination to burst into tears. Their purple moment is superlative slapstick. The gags are unforced and logical. The two stars are master comedians," end quote. Nobody paid these guys to write that kind of a review.
That is one hell of a review, isn't it? Yes, I read that one in your essay. I mean, master comedians is a great line to finish on, isn't it? Wonderful.
Actual howls the guy wrote. So even lesser Laurel and Hardy rates rave reviews then, now, and forever, provided we can keep the films alive, preserve them, which is what I spent $4 million doing, then sustain them and get them in front of future generations of fans to come to see and to discover and to love the way we do. So there's a lot I could say about Jimmy Parrott, Leo McCarey, Beanie Walker, all the people in the cast, but we're running out of time, and I want to share a few thoughts about Anita Garvin, whom I was
yes, please,
lucky to know really well. In going through the stills on the backsides of several, I'd forgotten this, I found the printed in ink capital letters, Anita, Anita. In talking with Hal Roach Studios alumni, I always brought with me still photos to show them that would refresh their recollections of things I wanted to ask them about. But, back then I had access to all the studio's 8x10 nitrate still negatives, and I could strike new prints. So when Anita saw these stills and expressed interest in having them, she would write her first name on the back side. And she was particularly enthused to see one taken at the table inside the Pink Pup nightclub, where Kate Elise is brandishing her little Saturday night gun, and Anita is flashing her stiletto knife with great glee, I might add. And so to your point raised earlier, I asked her, why are the two refined and lovely ladies eating twice?
Yes.
they had first just dined with those two deadbeats who stiffed them. And then here they are again right away feasting on huge steak dinners. And you can see Anita Garvin is chowing down on that steak.
Yes.
She showed up for work, and anyway, what she said to me, she said, well, I don't write those scripts, I just follow them. And they gave us real food, too, right out of the Argan Cafe or the Argan, whatever you call the commissary there. So, she was there for lunch.
Yeah, they're ravenous when they devour it.
Absolutely. And it always bothered me. Well, what the hell? They just... So now they're having a second feast in there? Well, so anyway, so what I always told friends about Anita Garvin, it's rare when you get to know someone you've seen on the screen and they surpass your expectations for them. She was one of the few who did. Being with her, doing anything was better than watching her movies, and that's the truth. It was almost like being in one of her movies. The way she'd do takes and throw lines is so creative and funny and full of life. And I tell maybe two stories that stand out. She told me a lot of private things about her life. One I shared, and I probably shouldn't have. She didn't tell me I couldn't, but I probably shouldn't have. But since some people know this now, here it is. Patrick, have you ever seen the Charlie Chase two-reeler called His Silent Racket, 1933, with Jimmy Finlayson, Muriel Evans, and Anita?
I don't think I have. No, I've not seen a lot of Charlie Chase's stuff, I must admit.
Okay, well, you're a young guy. You've got a lot of years to do this. But at the top of your list, after you discover Bob and Ray, and yes. I'll say again, you will thank me the longest you live. I promise. After you discover Bob and Ray, you need to see, I'm a big fan of Charlie Chase. His Silent Racket, that's the film. You have to find that, see that. I knew the beautiful Muriel Evans really well too, but in person later in life, and I mean, if you haven't seen the many Charlie Chases that Muriel Evans is, she's only in one Laurel and Hardy film, and it's a brief appearance in Pack Up Your Troubles. She was actually not under contract to Hal Roach Studios. She was always under contract to MGM, and they would loan her because somebody at the studio, and I suspect Charlie Chase, liked working with her, but she was beautiful. And but in person later in life, she was not what you'd expect from seeing the Hal Roach films and the B Westerns she made with Hopalong Cassidy, John Wayne, Buck Jones. I love all those. Anyway, when you see this film, and I hope you will very soon, there is an underlying dynamic going on there, one you would never suspect. I never did. Anita and Muriel knew each other from films they made in the mid-20s at Educational Pictures on Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood, right next to what we know as the Goldwyn Studio. Anita was then married to one of the unfunny minor stars there, a guy named Jerry Drew. Although what she ever saw in that guy, I cannot imagine. Maybe what he had is something we couldn't see, if you know what I mean. But
Family show, Richard.
yes, I know. But that's right. We're not going to go there. But whatever it was, Muriel Evans saw it too. And one day, Anita caught them in bed together.
Oh, God. Right, okay.
That was the end of Anita's first marriage.
Wow.
I think it was over by the time Anita made their Purple Moment, but I don't remember for sure. Now, Jerry Drew's real name was Clem Beauchamp, so you can see why he used a different screen name.
Yeah.
But you can see that name decades later in the screen credits for things like the Superman TV series, which occasionally shot scenes at Hal Roach Studios.
Oh, right, okay.
So Anita, being a truly wonderful human being, forgave Muriel, but not really. Now, I first connected with Anita in 1977, but much later in her life, she was living at the Motion Picture Country Home, where I'd drive out there, way out there in Calabasas, to see her for lunch. At the same time, who do you suppose was doing volunteer work there but Muriel Evans? Of course she was. So Anita and I would be having lunch there, one of the tables in the dining room. And Muriel Evans would, she'd come in there and sit down with us. And Anita was her usual cordial, funny, fun-loving, fast self. But whenever she could, when it was possible to do so, where Muriel wouldn't notice, Anita would steal a glance at me and make a face. So funny, so funny. You can imagine. I mean, just for an instant, she would give me some look like she was looking into a camera. So funny. So she never really forgave Muriel, but she should have, and for good reason, because it opened the door for her to meet and marry Clifford Red Stanley in 1930, with whom she enjoyed a storybook marriage. You know, one of those. She got very lucky, and I got to know him briefly too before he died. And Randy laments that he didn't get a chance to interview Red Stanley because of his connection to that. I can't remember the name of that musical group, but
Irving Arrington and his Commanders.
That's it. So the other story I would relate is this: I collect 16mm prints of B westerns, not only Hal Roach comedies. The hardest ones to see have always been B+ exciting westerns starring the fellow I named earlier, my friend George O'Brien, who had a long association with John Ford and starred in the single greatest silent film ever made, the exquisite Sunrise. In the early 30s, he made a series of westerns at the pre-merger Fox studio, mostly adaptations of Zane Grey stories with people in supporting casts like, believe it or not, Myrna Loy, Humphrey Bogart, Maureen O'Sullivan, people like that. And Maureen O'Sullivan was Hal Roach's next-door neighbor.
Oh, wow.
Bill Everson's closest friend growing up in England was Alex Gordon, who became a close friend of mine also. Alex worked for Gene Autry there as a teenager, when Gene Autry would do personal appearances, and also at the end of Gene Autry's life. And in between, he was a producer at Fox. And while there, he secretly made up 16mm prints of what Bill termed, for his signal article in Films and Review, Fox Treasures. Great article. Fox Treasures was. And were they ever? Eventually, Alex got fired for doing this, but not before he had the lab strike beautiful print downs on 16mm for Bill and himself of movies that were not on TV and no one could see. Great, rare. Those pre-merger Fox films, they're something. And eventually, I got some of those from Alex, including what is probably my all-time favorite film, Bulldog Drummond Strikes Back, with Ronald Colman, Loretta Young, and Warner Oland. Truly a perfect film. Too bad it's tied up with a rights problem and nearly impossible to see, except at my house. Now, I also got George O'Brien's Robber's Roost, 1933, from Alex in another trade. Red Stanley was a studio musician mostly, and I think it was at MGM. Randy would know for sure. He was part of a, as you say, I guess it was a swing or a pre-swing era band. And Randy knows all about that. But he appeared in just a few films. Robber's Roost was one of them. Now, when I traded with Alex Gordon to get this print, the only one ever made up on 16 millimeter, I told Anita. She had never seen this film. Red Stanley was long gone at this point, and she really, really missed him. And I asked Anita if she wanted to see the film. She'd never seen it. But I warned her that while he offers mild comedy relief in the story, it's a serious picture, and that Red is murdered in it. He's dragged to his death by a runaway horse in a rough action scene that is painful to watch. I mean, this is painful to watch, even if you didn't know Red Stanley, the actor playing this part. It's a tough scene to watch. But she didn't hesitate. She wanted to see it anyway, so I brought my Kodak Pageant projector and that 16 millimeter print out to her room at the Motion Picture Country Home. And of course, she just cried like a baby. And yet she wanted me to know how happy it made her to see her beloved Red.
Oh, lovely.
So there you are in the immortal words of Oliver Hardy, spoken in Sons of the Desert. That's all there is. There isn't
any more.
So you can send me off to a desert island. I'm all done, ready to go.
Wonderful. Well, I hate to bring it to a close. To be honest, Rich, it's wonderful. We'll have to do this again because there are many more stories. I'm sure that would be just as interesting.
I'm full of them, or full of it.
Well, so am I. So you are about to be stranded on a deserted atoll, but you are being allowed to take with you 4 Laurel and Hardy related items with you. You have a silent short, a talkie short, a feature film, and a Laurel and Hardy related book. So can you tell me what your choices will be? What will you keep with you?
Okay, well, for most of my life, I would have said that my favorite Laurel and Hardy feature film was Fra Diavolo.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's what Brilliant. I would have said. But today, if I had to pick one, I would pick Blockheads.
Blockheads, okay.
Well, good morning, James. Good morning, Mr. Hardy. What's the news this morning? I was just reading about a fellow that stayed in the trenches for 20 years after the war and didn't know it was over.
Well, how in the world could anyone be so stupid?
I don't know. Here's his picture. Oh.
I can't imagine anybody being that dumb.
Well.
Oh, yes, I can.
And for a sound short, it's easy for me. In my opinion, their best sound short and my favorite is Hog Wild.
Oh, okay. That's a nice one. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought you were going to meet me.
I was. But I've got to put the aerial up. Mrs. Hardy wants to get Japan.
Gee, I'd like to hear Japan, too. Do you mind if I help you?
I don't mind. That is, if you'll help me.
What do you like about Hog Wild, Richard?
Oh, I couldn't. Well, the score, first of all, the locations. I can't put it into words. It's just, I know I've been to all those locations so many times. I mean, I don't even want to get started on that because.
Have you ever been on the roof?
Well, okay, the roof. Now, I cannot think of his name. He's your countryman. Oh, I'm so sorry. I cannot think of the guy who made a deal with Dick Finer to reprint our Laurel and Hardy book and in England. What is his name?
Russell Babbage.
Russell, yes, Russell. Russell, I'm so sorry.
He's a good friend. I'm in touch with him regularly.
Okay, well, then Russell can confirm this story.
Yes,
Russell, do you know the story I'm going to tell you?
Yes, I do. So yeah, I want to hear you say it though, because it's a great one.
Okay, well, I met Russell prepared not to like him because he'd made a deal with that reprobate Dick Feiner. I don't want to go into that story, but I found out that like a lot of people, and I was one of them, a lot of people were taken in by Mr. Feiner, including Russell. But I found out that he was a really nice guy, a great guy, a sincere fan. And so we got to talking about locations. And so we sent him around to the various ones that were near. I mean, where we met the first time was at the Culver City Hotel. So, of course, the Laurel and Hardy locations that are right near there, we told him where they were and which ones were the best ones and so on. So he went back to England, and then he said, the next time I come, I want to arrange for us to go up on the roof of the Hog Wild house. Now, we know that the Hog Wild house was just a prop house built on an empty lot for the sake of that film. And the house that's there now is not the house that was there then. But he wanted to go up on the roof of that house and and do something, God knows what. And he kept running into roadblocks, one right after the other. Of course, you have to get permission from the people who own the damn house. I mean, you can't just walk onto the guy's private property, onto the lot with a ladder and climb up onto the roof. Yeah. But that's what he wanted to do. So he had to meet the resident who was not the owner. Well, the resident wouldn't give him permission. But I think it was the resident's wife who said, "What the hell are you doing? We don't own this house, so we got to protect ourselves from criminal or civil liability here. If there's an accident, I mean, you hear all the time about people falling off roofs. That's dangerous. I mean, just look what happened in Hog Wild." So we then had to go, or Russell had to go to the owner of the house where the residents referred us, and the guy said, "Well, you're going to have to take out your own insurance policy to go up on that roof." So, in other words, it got to be so convoluted and so impossible that we never were able to do that. But I had my friend Rich Carell, who was to Harold Lloyd, like I was to Hal Roach. And Rich Carell and I did an audio commentary for the Vivendi DVD set on. I think we did one on Hog Wild. I think that's the one we did. Yes, and Rich loves that film too, and I told Rich about this. You'll pardon me, Russell. Harebrained scheme to climb onto the roof of the Hog Wild house, and Rich was up for doing this. So we were going to do this. We were going to do it. Brilliant. But as I said, we couldn't. Anyway, so many things I could say about Hog Wild, but that's my favorite sound.
No, that's great. That's great. Okay.
As for the silent Laurel and Hardy's, the first silents I ever bought from Black Hawk Films were The Second 100 Years, Big Business, Two Tars, those three. And there are other terrific silents: Liberty, You're Darn Tootin', Habeas Corpus, Wrong Again. And if you listen to my audio commentary for Battle of the Century, and did you?
Yes, I did. Very good. It was excellent.
So you know, I prosecute the case for that one being the single greatest comedy of the silent era ever made by anyone, and I believe Perry Mason would have been proud of my closing argument. But on a personal, subjective basis, the short I would select is not Battle of the Century. If I could have only one, it would be The Finishing Touch.
Oh, good choice, sir. Yes, good choice.
But it's not their best film, but I remember the first time I ever saw it and how it made me feel, and I still see and experience this film through that same prism today. And I was thrilled when I was able to locate a 35 millimeter print for Munich to master from. So there's one other thing too. My friend Lois Laurel was born on December 10, 1927, while they were shooting this picture, and I always think of that. And also, have I mentioned, I guess I did, Patrick, that I have lunch every Tuesday at the Culver City Hotel. I did cover that.
Yes.
Okay, so many silent Hal Roach comedies were shot right there in and around the Culver City Hotel. In 2005, that place was reopened under new management and has made a remarkable comeback as it's a beautiful boutique hotel now. And you know who Chuck McCann was, right?
Yeah.
So, well, he and I saw one another 4 or 5 nights a week. And in 2005, I told Chuck to break up the week. Why don't we have lunch at the Culver City Hotel on Wednesday to support the place? So we started doing that. And to get there, I have to come from the east side of Beverly Hills. And my route takes me to Motor Avenue, which first existed only to connect Fox to MGM. And you go through Cheviot Hills, Palms, and Culver City, which is only a few miles, actually. And on the Cheviot Hills stretch, you drive right by Stan Laurel's house, Elmer Regis's house, which you see in Bacon Grabbers, and the lot where they tried to build the finishing touch house. And it's the corner of Motor and Club Drive. And I just love seeing all that. And the other house you see is William Terhune's house, which you know from big business. And by the way, all these misinformed fans who criticize Hal Roach for the story he tells about making big business, I have been correcting them for decades. Hal Roach was not wrong about that, but as Wilfred Lucas says in Pardon Us, and still they come. However, that's another story we don't have time for.
No, but we will. We will another time. I will ask you about that another time. I'd love to, because that was the very first communication I had with you, Richard. I don't know if you remember. I wrote my very first blog on big business, and I did exactly what you just said. I quoted all of that sort of stuff, and Stan said this, and Hal Roach said that, and you were straight on to me and say, no, you can't come on saying that. So we had a bit of a ding dong to start with, but it was all in good. I
don't remember that, but the reason I don't remember that is I've told everyone in the world at this point by now that they have that story wrong, that they don't understand what happened. They don't. And I think just when I think that everyone must certainly know this by now, someone comes along and says what they do to criticize Hal Roach. But anyway, as I said, we won't go into that.
We won't go into that, not yet. No,
okay,
but we will later. That'd be great. And your final choice, of course, is a book, Laurel and Hardy related books.
Books. Okay. As for Laurel and Hardy books, Rob Stone is a friend of mine, and I promised I'd help him when he does a revision of his Laurel or Hardy book, and I wouldn't want to offend him by picking someone else's book. That's for starters. Long ago, I collaborated with Leonard Maltin on a little Laurel and Hardy book, and I have the same comment there. And Bill Everson's Films of Citadel book was a major influence despite the errors, and he was a great personal friend and mentor, as I talked about early. He sent me 16 millimeter prints gratis when he was dying, for God's sake. So in Munich, we put together a book on Hal Roach for Stiftung Deutsche Kinemathek, and I got Bill to contribute an essay. And when I lived in New York, if you needed to screen, some rare Ken Maynard Western for Tiffany or anything, you could call him in the evening and stop by his apartment, and he'd either run it for you at midnight or loan you the print. He was one of the greats. And I use my middle initial in bylines because my father had a different one, and because that's what William K. Everson did.
Okay, right.
His name was actually Keith William Everson, but I think his favorite director was William K. Howard, who made The Power and Glory in 1933, another one of those so-called Fox treasures, which was a forerunner of Citizen Kane. So Bill switched the names. Instead of Keith William Everson, he became William K. Everson because of William K. Howard. Now, Randy Scredfed, I've got more to say here.
No, you go for it. I'm all ears.
Okay, so Randy, whose parents are from Minnesota, you have to nominate Randy for the Hall of Fame for the blood and treasure expended throughout his entire life producing the latest incarnation of his wonderful book, his huge and comprehensive magnum opus. Originally, decades ago, when he began his magic behind the movies, he wanted me to collaborate with him on it, but I was a little burned out on Laurel and Hardy at the time, and I had a lot of other projects pulling on my time at that point in my career. And besides, if I had picked Randy's big book on the way to that desert island, the boat might sink. So two more great friends I need to mention, powerful influences. The much missed mentors, Al Kilgore and Jack McCabe. I used to say that Al Kilgore was the single funniest and most endearing human being I had ever encountered. And it's too long to tell here the story of the book we did, the big picture book. But one of the things I tried to do but didn't finish because we ran out of time was exactly what Randy did do in his book. It was Al Kilgore who conceived the idea of a picture book based on the feature. I don't know whether it was Life magazine or Look magazine. Every issue, when those were big important magazines, every issue they'd cover a movie in by publishing all the stills that showed the story. So he wanted to do that with Laurel and Hardy. So, but in addition, I wanted to take one short and one feature as examples and tell the entire story from script to screen with all the behind the scenes production information. And I was going to focus on big business and our relations, but we ran out of both time and space. As I said before, you don't always get your way. Compromise, deadlines, budgets, etc. So later I did write long essays like that for our website in Munich on some of the films, as you know, Patrick, because you've mentioned you've read them. So 6 great friends, 5 great books. I could no more pick among and between them than I could choose between Our Gang and Laurel and Hardy or between Laurel and Hardy themselves. So there's your answer. And as Mr. Laurel says in Sons of the Desert, we're stuck in it or with it, etc.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I will allow you. You've got a nice little library on your atoll. That's fine. And as you know the authors personally, I can't argue with that. So that's no problem. No problem. Great choices. And Richard, I'm going to have to let you go. You've done remarkably well with your Vertigo as well. So thank you so much for spending this time with us today. It's been absolutely wonderful, as I knew it would be. A real treat. And if I can take you up on it, I will have you back on again at some point, and we'll talk about big business and all of the cast and crew that you knew so well. Fantastic, Richard. Thank you so much, sir. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you.
And I'd love to talk to you again sometime.
Thank you so much.
Well, I think you'll agree that was such a great chat with Richard, and he just has so many wonderful memories and stories to share that I really can't wait for the next opportunity to get him back on the show. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and that you might have learned something new about their purple moment, or that you've been inspired to go back and watch the film again. If you do, please do get in touch and share your thoughts either on email or on Facebook. What I'd really love you to do, though, if you're able, is to share this podcast with anybody that you think will enjoy it. I mean, that's the real power of social media, when people like you share posts or links with your friends. As Ben Modell says, I don't know your friends, but you do. So let's try and share this podcast as far and wide as we can. It'd be great to see our show, and more importantly, Laurel and Hardy climbing the podcast charts. As usual, 1,000 thanks to the Bohunks Orchestra for the wonderful music. Thanks again to Richard for being such a great guest. And last but by no means least, thank you to you for being here with me again to share our love for the boys. Your homework for next time is to watch the next film in the chronology, Should Married Men Go Home? And until then, stay safe, keep laughing, and it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And it's a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.